Okay.
It's good. It's been a little.
Okay, everybody. All right, it is Wednesday, August the 7th. I call this meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. We'll start with roll call.
Oh, no. Oh, you're thinking of Mike.
Michael Hall?
Mike Hall.
You're
Oh,
thinking of Mike. I don't know if he's going to be there or not.
Roll call.
The builder.
oh, yeah, I'm sorry. You're right, I am.
Jeannie, we're in roll call.
I'm sorry. Jeannie Nair.
Okay.
Tony Stein.
Jerry Fleming?
Dave Bench.
Lloyd Newton for legal.
All right, thank you.
Oh.
All right, and our next order of business is to entertain any public comments. Has anybody signed up for public comment for things that are not otherwise on the agenda?
None for not on the agenda.
Okay, none for not on the agenda, very good. So then we'll move along. We have in the consent agenda several meeting minutes. We've gone through them. Do we have a motion on consent agenda or any discussion? Well, then, if there's no discussion, then I'm going to make a motion that we approve the consent agenda as written.
I second the motion.
All right. Do we have any discussion around that? Right? All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Okay, ayes carry. Moving into public hearing, we have two public hearing things. We're going to, we've got a lot going on this evening, so we're going to try to keep our public discussion down to a 5-minute limit, and so that we can go home and have dinner later. So, Ashley, would you like to introduce public hearing, agenda item number 6?
Absolutely. So this is public hearing, discussion, and possible action on a city-initiated rezoning of 5100 Rollingwood Drive, parcel ID 107772, from the Commercial District C to Residential District R. Just as a reminder, this is the property that back when we approved our commercial code rezoning, where it changed all of our C1 and C2 to C. This property was brought up. It had been being used as a residential property for as long as I think anyone here could remember. And so the goal of tonight's rezoning is to rezone that to residential, which fits with the use that the property is being used for. We did send out the notices that were required, and this was actually a motion of the P&Z when they did their the rezoning of all of the commercial district properties to include this one with the city-initiated rezoning. So at this time, we will hold a public hearing, and at that point, after that has been completed, we're looking for a recommendation from the P&Z to the City Council to either approve or reject the rezoning of this property from commercial to residential.
Okay, I will open the floor to public hearing. Does anybody here wish to speak on this item? All right, it is 6:08. We're going to close the public hearing. I think you all know what it is we're here to do on this. I don't have any objection to it. I think it should be a slam dunk for us. Does anybody have a motion?
I'll move to approve the rezoning of 5100 Rollingwood Drive from commercial to residential.
Okay, we have a motion. We have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion around it? All right, hearing none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Very good. Ayes carry. You're holding. Thank you. All right, moving along. Agenda item number 7, public hearing. Public hearing, discussion, possible action, and ordinance amending the zoning ordinance to prohibit the rental of amenities in the residential zoning district. Ashley, would you?
Yes, I will just give a brief update on where this is. So this has been before the Planning and Zoning Commission before. City Council has also reviewed it. The last time it was here for just discussion among the P and Z, there was a request to send it back to council with some questions. There were questions about whether this applied to properties being utilized for filming sets, charity events, parking, people selling their parking during special events, and then the definition of what it means to be a rental. The city council and legal counsel discussed this at their following meeting, and the response we got is that the attached ordinance does not address photo shoots, filming of a commercial, things like that, or rental of parking on private driveways and things like that. But these uses, however, are not permitted uses in the residential district, and so if not specifically allowed, they're also likely not allowed. But that's the way our code currently stands. That's how it is currently. That doesn't really have anything to do with the ordinance in the packet. And so the ordinance here today just strictly disallows the renting of amenities in the residential district. I think this came up, one of the examples given was pools. So there are now apps similar to Airbnb where you can just rent out your pool. I think one is called Swimply, and people can just only rent out specifically that amenity. And so the goal of this ordinance was to disallow that kind of a rental.
Okay.
So.
I have a question about the way the recommendation was written. And it says these uses, however, are not listed in the permitted uses section of the residential district, and if not specifically allowed, would be considered prohibited unless it was a home occupation of an occupant of the residence. Can you explain unless it was a home? I don't understand that.
I believe that would be, for example, when it comes to photo shoots. So just having a photo shoot in your home would not necessarily be allowed, but if you're a photographer and that's your home occupation, you could then conduct photo shoots in your house. So that's, I guess, an example of a home occupation where that would be allowed.
But you wouldn't be paying yourself to do that.
Right, somebody would be paying you, but I guess if that is your occupation, then it would technically be allowed because we do allow home occupations in our residential district. Mm-hmm.
I remember there was some discussion about, you can't rent your pool out, somebody come use it, but what if somebody gives swim lessons at their pool? And I think the intent was that would be okay, if I remember right. I don't know if that was specifically discussed by council.
Let me look at the ordinance drafted. I don't know that we particularly discussed rental of for that. If you were giving, if you were giving lessons in your pool, yes,
Which
yeah.
I
I
think is
guess
fine.
if it's a home occupation,
So
absolutely.
if you owned the home and you were giving lessons in your pool, it would be okay to
Absolutely, yes,
charge?
yes,
Okay.
yeah.
And this, what is being recommended here, supports that.
This does not disallow that to,
Okay, good.
not allow that to
Very good.
continue. Mm-hmm. And so as far as action on this, we would again be asking for a recommendation to the city council to either approve, deny, or even if you wanted to make some changes or however you wanted to do it, but a recommendation to council on how to handle this ordinance, and then they will take that up at their next meeting.
Okay, very good. All right.
Council has already reviewed this draft ordinance language and sent it to us to review.
They have, yes.
Okay, I'm going to open the floor up for public hearing.
Good evening. I'm Glenn Harris, 3012 Hatley. I'm in favor of this amendment to our current ordinances to regulate rental of amenities. It is consistent with our current regulations on short-term rental of residences and provides similar protections to community members who would like to continue to see residential zone properties used as residences rather than businesses. There has been an explosion of platforms that are explicitly for the purpose of providing opportunities to monetize home ownership through very short hourly or daily rental of amenities like swimming pools, outdoor grill areas, sport courts. Apps with names like Swimply, Pier Space, Rent My Court, Sniff Spot, Curb Flip, Vanly. The list goes on. This usage model comes at the expense of surrounding neighbors in the form of increased noise and traffic, and blurs the distinction between residential zoning and business zoning. Please be proactive in recommending the adoption of this amendment to preserve the residential feel of private homes in our city. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have anyone else? All right, then I will close, it's 6:15, I will close the public hearing. I'll entertain a motion.
I will move that we recommend approval of the ordinances drafted by council and approved by city council.
All right, we have a motion, do we have a second?
I second it.
All right, there's a motion and a second, do we have any additional discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes carry. Thank you very much. Moving along to the regular agenda. This is going faster than I thought it would. Agenda item number 8, discussion and possible action regarding a draft ordinance providing that the front yard of a lot shall be the yard which abuts the addressed street. Ashley, you want to speak to this?
Sure. So this item comes as from direction from City Council. So at their May meeting, the City Council reviewed a draft ordinance that was similar to this, that provided that the front yard of a lot shall be the lot's addressed street. This came after some discussion about address changes and the possibility of people changing addresses and then changing setbacks. And this is a way to try to ensure that homes are being built to face the front of the street that they are addressed on, to avoid those future address changes and things like that that would ultimately change the setbacks or at least could possibly do that. So this ordinance here before you has been drafted to two things that it does is it changes the definition of front yard, front, which go ahead and says that the yard which abuts the address street of the lot is the front yard. So that's the first change that it makes. And then additionally, it takes the building official out of the determination of the street address. So currently the code reads, the building official shall determine the street address and thus the front yard of the corner of each corner lot. And that what this does is take the building official out of it and just defines front yard. And so this is a ordinance that has come from City Council. It is not here for public hearing today, so this is really just an introduction to it. This hadn't been before P&Z before. So really the point here is just to get some discussion. If there's anything you'd like us to look at or any recommendations you'd like to make as far as drafting, we'll take those back and consider that, and then this will be placed for public hearing at the next opportunity for that.
So we don't have any language in our packet, right?
You actually do, yes. Yeah, we do have code language on this one just because it had already been reviewed and talked about quite a bit at the City Council level, but
I didn't see it either.
there has not been a public hearing. So in the packet currently, it is the
Page
second
35.
attachment. If you're looking at the HTML packet that says draft ordinance front yard.
So is
Was
that,
it added late or something? I printed everything.
It has been in there the whole time. What was added late was the first page of the one sheet that just explains that it came from council at their May meeting. So it has been in the packet. I'm happy to print out copies if anybody would like to have that in hard copy here.
I have a question. I understand the motivation for the ordinance. Does this prevent permanently any change of direction for a corner lot?
This does not prevent future address changes, so they
Okay.
still could come ask. Address changes do have to be approved by the city council, so they could still ask for it. It's just that this is now the standard by which the front yard is, I guess, determined.
so we're gonna take the current address, whatever that may be, and absent consent from council, no swapping the address on the corner lot.
That is, I'm not sure how it would affect homes that are currently, already built. That would be something we could either
Well, not
try to
necessarily
answer
already
here.
built, but every lot in this neighborhood has a current address, right?
Mhm.
And so the point is that we're gonna stick to whatever the address is, street X, that is your front yard. You can't go to council and say, well, I mean, you could ask, but,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you can't just, I guess before they went to staff and you would allow them to change the address if they so chose?
So no, it's always had to go through council. What I think maybe was happening was when it was getting built, they were facing the front, they were saying, well, this is the front of my house, even though the address is on a different corner. So they were building as though the front, and they were getting the front setback on that other side, even though the address remained the other corner, the other street that makes that corner intersection. And
Without
so-
having to get permission from council.
Right, and in that case, they weren't changing their address, they were keeping it, but I guess in some cases what has happened is that has happened, and then they've come to council later and said, oh, it's really confusing now because emergency vehicles, mailman can't find the home, and so what this would do is make it, supposedly right the first time, where you have to build facing the street that you're addressed on, and that way it kind of prevents those in the future. As far as existing homes, I'm not sure what the implication on that with them would be.
The only thing I have problems with here is that I think I know what this intends to do and what it's trying to do, but it's as much a front door need as it is a front yard need, trying to address the front door and where the front door of a house faces. Because if you'll talk to the fire department, they say that they get their cues from where the front door of a house is before they even look for an address.
Mm-hmm.
So it is an actual matter of safety and concern that, that the fire department or ambulance or whatever can find your home quickly. And if your front door is on the side of your house, what is legal to the side of your house, then it makes it much more difficult for emergency services to find the place.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm concerned that what's written here just doesn't say that. And I wonder if we can come up with language that makes it such that the front door becomes the cue for which the address is assigned.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, and I don't know how to define a front door, but I wonder if there's something that we can do to kind of tighten this up a little bit so that it's not just talking about a front yard, because a front yard can be anything.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I guess, we're happy to take that feedback and go back to drafting and see if there's anything that can be done to clear that up. My concern would just be, there are plenty of homes on corner lots that have doors on both sides, and how the front yard or front door is determined, if it has to do with use or how, a lot of times there will be a garage and a door on one side and a front door and a walkway on one side, and I don't know how, how that would be defined, but I'm happy to take that back as feedback and look at other ways to try to address
You're
that.
right that there are front and side doors and things like that, but, for most houses, it's kind of plain to see from the outside which side of the house was intended to be the front of the house,
Mhm.
front of the house. And I don't know how to get that into the language, though,
Yep, I understand.
It
Are
might-
you trying to say that you feel like the front door has to be on the side where the front yard is?
Yes, I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
What do you think about that?
I think that happens most of the time.
Yeah, it does happen most of the time, that's right. We're batting back against the things that are not most of the time.
Yeah, but that's, like our house though, is not.
You're not on a corner though.
We're not on a corner, no, that's true. But our front door is in a courtyard, it's not,
Yeah.
and it's facing another direction. But I totally support what you're saying. I'm not opposed to adding something about, an expanded definition of what a front yard is, I
Mhm.
guess.
Okay.
Maybe that's it.
What was the impetus behind this? Like what's the problem we're trying to solve?
So it came from a discussion about address changes. So just to rewind, we didn't have in our code any kind of process for address changes. So in the past, they had always gone to council, but it was not written anywhere in our code that city council approved address changes. And so a few months back, we brought an ordinance to council that simply codified the process that had been followed, where somebody would approach us, fill out an application or write a letter that said, here's why I want to change my address, and then they would go to council with it. So when that got changed, this just got brought up about the issue of front yards, about people possibly gaming the system by building a home, calling a front yard something, and then turning it and then changing the setbacks. Because currently on a corner lot, you can have, it's a 30-foot front setback, and then depending on different things, if you have rear abutting yards, there's different setback numbers. And so we've recently had an address change that was approved that when they turned it, it effectively would allow them then to expand further closer to their next door neighbor that used to be the rear neighbor. And so it was just a discussion around that made everybody kind of consider, you know, how are they being built in the first place? Is there something we can put in the code that would try to solve that on the front end?
So it's really an issue of setbacks more than anything.
Yeah, part of it. Because when they when they turn their house, it
Right.
turns setbacks. So, so
Well, again, that's
and
an
we-
expansion.
go on.
Brooke Brown, your council liaison, there have also been several properties where.
Brooke, would you come up to the microphone, please? Thank you.
Brooke Brown, 307 Nixon. There have been, the question came to council because there have been several instances where a home was built with the front door facing the side street instead of facing the address street. So when 911 shows up because someone's had a heart attack, they go to the side street because that's where the address is and not the front door. Same thing with other kinds of delivery services. So that is the current code language says the building official determines the street address and thus the front yard. So you would have a building official approving a site plan where the front yard is not the addressed, it doesn't face the street where the address is. So this in effect ties the hands of the building official because they have to, the site plan must reflect that the front of the house faces the addressed front yard, so that it eliminates the problem where we've had several now that have the side street as the address, the front yard is where the front door, the front yard faces the side street, and they've come back after the fact, after the house is built, after the site plan is approved, to get approval to move the address to where the front door is. And so then you have a situation where if you move the address, the site plan isn't correct with respect to zoning setbacks. So it eliminates that problem, and it allows 911 to properly to know where the front of the house is for purposes of any emergency services, and the mail service also.
So in that particular instance you just described, have we allowed someone who built a house and then goes and wants to change the address, which would effectively make it non-conforming, and then give them additional latitude to go build into the side? Have we allowed that?
We did it last month's meeting because the safety issues, can't change the house now, but it has been allowed in the past. The site plan has been allowed with the addressed street being the side street.
Right.
But we've had one application to approve a change of address to the match where the front of the house is, and the council approved it after discussion and debate and thought safety is the overriding concern in that instance.
An already built house in that
an
case.
already built house.
So yeah, I think there's two concerns. I mean, if it's built, it's built, and if we're trying to fix that, it seems fine, and that could go to city council. And then on the other side, somebody's trying to change the address before building so that they can change the setbacks to their preference. I would agree that that should go to council or
And I think in that instance now, with this amendment, that will go to Board of Adjustment to determine whether a variance should be granted. Because you're changing a setback. And you're changing how that house on the corner is oriented to one or the other neighbors. So it's a more serious concern. But this language would make sure that that kind of a request would have to go to planning and, would have to go to Board of Adjustment, if it were going to change the setbacks.
Would, putting this into play, if a request was being made to change an address, would the commission or committee that was allowing or disallowing it have the benefit of seeing the building plans before they made a decision?
Yes, they're here, they're public records here, yes.
They are public records, but does that ever come into play whenever the discussion happens?
Well,
Like, what-
review last week's city council discussion, that did arise.
Okay.
I would
Okay.
think that somebody would figure out whether they can change the address before they actually design the whole house.
You would think. But then, once that address has been changed, then the building plans need to correspond with that new address. And since the building plans haven't been approved yet, they have the opportunity to be not approved, right?
Well, if the address has already been changed, I wouldn't think it would be an issue if the building plan's not getting approved. If the
Well, I mean, it doesn't make any difference what the address is. What I think it makes a difference is that once that address is established, what the orientation of the house that's being planted on it, that makes a difference.
Yeah, but I don't.
correct.
Is it,
Yeah.
does this really solve the problem? Because you can't dictate where someone designs a front door. So you could change the address, have the 30-foot setback, and they can still put a front door on the other side.
They would
But it
have
does
to go to
define where the
council.
front yard is, which is a bigger deal than the front
But it
door
doesn't
to me.
address the safety issue.
They would have to go to council to change their address, so council would still be ultimately the one approving an address change. If somebody wanted to build their home facing a different way than their street address, that's when they would go to BOA and try to get a variance to do that. So they're only, if they wanted to build not facing their street, they would have to go to BOA or go to council and ask for an address change.
What do you mean by not facing their street?
If their address is on Rollingwood Drive, and they wanna turn it a different direction, but their address is Rollingwood Drive, they could build the home facing the other street only if BOA allowed it. Because
Why?
because
If they comply with the setbacks, they can design a house with a front door facing the other street.
Well,
It's not
this-
front door, it's front yard.
it's about the yard,
Yeah.
which is also the setback. We don't have setbacks in our code, it's called yards. So essentially, I guess I mean,
I get that, but I'm saying it
They
doesn't
could,
address
they
the
would just
safety
have
issue that you
setbacks
brought up. It does nothing for that, right? Realistically.
Well,
if
other
they were
than
to-
now, if you build, so just picture the house on Rollingwood and Riley that faces Riley.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say that house, the address was on Rollingwood Drive. They came and changed it the other way so they could front.
You remember that?
Yeah, and then that changes the setbacks, which could have an impact on the neighbor, right?
I certainly get
Yeah.
that, but it doesn't
And so
address
then,
the
so I think that
safety
happened in
issue.
some of these, and then they didn't actually change the address though, so then they built it that way. But the address stayed the same, so this allows city council to come fix the address now for safety concerns. But in the future, if somebody comes and their address says X Rollingwood Drive, but I wanna make my front yard, my big front yard be on Riley, the answer is no unless you go get BOA approval.
Right. But, okay, going to
In
our,
which case, you'd get their approval, which would change the address, which would fix the safety issue, and then
So-
you'd build your house.
so I would ask, going back to our planning and zoning, recent planning and zoning training, what would be the hardship that would cause BOA to do such an approval?
That would be up
Probably,
to
yeah,
BOA
that'd
to
be-
to
Okay,
determine.
then, if that's not known right, now that means it's almost a no. It's a no.
Oh, it'll be up to
That you don't
BOA
wanna do
to
that.
determine
Yeah,
whether
yeah,
the,
yeah.
whether
Well, I
they're.
remember,
Problem.
I think
But
we
problem.
approved one of these in the
Yeah.
context of a replat
Yeah.
sometime in the
Mhm.
s-
I think, I
past
think that's
several
how they
years.
happened, is mostly
Mhm.
replats
Yeah.
That
because
has
of
happened
setbacks.
that has happened in the past, and that's an interesting one because we shouldn't be putting setbacks on plats, and that's something that has been corrected in the last couple years. And so at that point, at some point determined that you needed a replat to change your setbacks. But we no longer put those on plats because they're not supposed to be on plats. That's not the point of a plat, is to have those setback lines. And that was causing us issues when what was drawn on the plat didn't match what our code said from a zoning perspective and setback. So they did used to come, it's interesting, we looked back at the history and sometimes address changes just came in the form of a letter. Sometimes they came as a replat for the purpose of an address change. And so that's why we put a new process in the code for address changes.
Because it was like a two-house block, and it actually made more sense the way they were moving the front yard from one to the other. It aligned it better with the
It
neighbors.
was more aesthetic than anything else, than,
Well, yeah,
it was.
the lines,
Yeah.
aesthetic, and so now, if that scenario came up, they couldn't get it changed, it would have to go to BOA, and then, would Board of Adjustment say that's,
We'll go to council.
okay, I definitely am not understanding.
This doesn't affect the exception that's in the code for corner lot setbacks where the two lots rear property lines abut. That exception remains in the code as it's always been in the code. What
What about the address in that scenario?
the address in that scenario,
What if
the-
it doesn't line up
Yeah.
correctly with the exception in the code?
that's what this fixes. It's that if you can't take advantage of the rear-to-rear setback just by changing your address but not the orientation of the house. So the rear is the opposite property under our code today. The rear is the opposite. The rear yard is opposite to the front yard. And so now what we're trying to ensure here is that going forward, the front yard must also be must face the address street. It doesn't change the setback when a corner lot would fall within the rear-to-rear setback exception. So that does not change. It changes who can take advantage of that rule, because you can't just claim the side street as the rear, keep the address in order to get the rear back-to-back exception, or claim the side address in order to get the rear-to-rear exception, unless that is opposite your front yard. Does that make sense?
Well,
This is not the.
Can you refresh me on the exception when it's rear to rear? What was the advantage?
If two corner lots are rear to rear and it's a two house block,
Yeah.
then
Like this.
the sides of both houses will face the side street.
Right.
And so you have an exception, that is where a
That lets you go
20-foot
to
side
30 feet.
setback is allowed,
That's right.
rather than the 30-foot setback. On other blocks, the corner house aligns with both the houses along one side of the street, the side street, and along the front street. And so there was a requirement that both those setbacks be 30 feet in that instance, so that you don't have a house out of line with the rest of the houses on that block.
Yeah, thank you.
So there's no action required tonight.
no, there was not. We're just talking about this. And it's
Okay.
gonna come back to us, and I think the notion is that we start thinking about this. And if there's an opportunity to maybe improve it, and I'm gonna be thinking about this hard because I'm not sure this does it all. I know what wants to happen, and I'd like to see what wants to happen, but I'm not sure that what this says is gonna make it happen.
And Commissioners, what I can't determine on the spot here is whether or not some other provision of the code requires that the front door face the front yard. That may or may not be in our code, or it may be in the other requirements in the code. I just can't tell you yes or no on that tonight. So it's a good question.
Okay. So, you'll see this again. I would ask you to go back and think about it. To the extent that we've achieved understanding of what's trying to happen, I think that's the important thing.
And part of that front door issue might be, the language might be stated in such a way that you access the front door through the front yard. Because like I just said, even though I'm not on the corner, my
Yeah.
front door does not face the street.
Right.
But it's accessed through the front door.
Right.
I mean, the front yard.
Right.
So I just think we need to be careful with our language.
I agree with you, and thinking ahead of all this, does that, the way your house sets, would that constitute a special exception? I hope not, but, is that what it is, I'm just not sure how to attack this beast, I don't know. But I'll be thinking about it around 3 a.m. this morning, I can promise. All right. Do we have any additional discussion around this? We can move along to the next agenda item. Okay, that's fine. All right. Let's move on to regular agenda item number 9, discussion regarding the CRC residential building height recommendations that have been set for public hearing on September 4th, 2024. Is anybody signed up to talk about this? All right.
Yeah, and I think Jeff probably. I'm happy to go after him. He might cover everything.
We have Mr. Azell on Zoom.
Was there anything that you wanted to introduce to it before we started?
I was just gonna give a quick update that this is not
This is fine.
posted for action today. So we have not sent this through the public hearing process. That will be on September 4th. So we have scheduled a joint public hearing of the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council for September 4th for this item. Notices will be sent out accordingly, and the community will be notified. But this is just showing you the document that has been that includes the recommendations that came from the CRCRC and then were approved by City Council to be put through the public hearing process.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not the ordinance language that you've seen for the other two documents. This is just simply the recommendations that are currently being drafted into ordinance form for that September 4th public hearing. We do expect to have those well in advance of that public hearing available next week when we send out the notices. So that way, as people get their notices, they can visit our website and check those out. But so this is just simply to show here are the items that will be being drafted and will be brought to that public hearing on September 4th, and then to kind of just get everybody familiar with it, answer any questions, and discuss it. So that's all.
So there's code being drafted around this
Yes.
that is intended to be reviewed at that public hearing?
That is correct.
And that code is going to be drafted by next week for us to review?
It will be. Yes, so it was directed at the last city council meeting, so legal's been working on it for a couple weeks now. We should have it by early next week. Once we do, we'll let everybody know. We'll put it on our website in the public notices section, and then as people get those notices that say, a change might be happening for building height, that's where they can go take a look at it, and they can call up to City Hall and talk to us about it or ask any questions.
And you're going to see similar discussions around the tree ordinance.
Absolutely, exact same process for the tree
Same
ordinance.
process. We'll go through it.
So at that meeting, September 4th, what's the, approve that?
That will
or-
be the actual public hearing. So it's a joint public hearing. So the city council has to make a motion to set a joint public hearing. So the two we held today on the rezoning and the amenities, those were just individual public hearings. City council scheduled a joint one. So at that September 4th meeting, we will hold a joint public hearing, and then P and Z will be able to consider, possibly take action, and make a recommendation on these, or the actual ordinance with the language written. And the language written will encompass the recommendations that have been made here. So, this is just a preview to what will be happening on September
All
4th.
right. Very good, thank you. Good. All right, if there's somebody who is signed up to speak, as I said at the beginning of the meeting, I'd like to hold the public discussion on this to 5 minutes. If we need to go further, we can review that at the end of 5 minutes, but who's up?
We have Mr. Isabel has his hand raised, and then we have Mr. Clinton signed up to speak.
Mr. Rizal, would you like to speak?
Sure. Thank you, sir. Just to make a clarification, you just said the public discussion will be limited to 5 minutes. Do you mean 5 minutes per person?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
I said,
5 minutes
you
per
just made a
person.
comment that public discussion will be limited to 5 minutes. Did
Yes,
you
that's
mean per person, or everyone has to?
For everyone, for the public. Yeah, per person, yes.
Per person. Okay, thank you. Just to clarify too, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Maybe you're a little too close to your microphone. I'm having some trouble understanding you, Mr. Rizal.
Is this better?
Maybe.
Would y'all prefer? Well, if y'all can't hear me, just please interrupt.
Okay.
I'm going to be quick. First, I was not attending
Mr.
your
Isbell,
April
We're
meeting,
losing you, I think.
so this is the first time I've had an opportunity to speak to y'all.
Sounds like a bad connection.
Yeah, I'm going to dial in on my phone.
All right. Okay. Would someone else like to come to the podium? Thank you.
Ryan Clinton, 4714 Timberline, and you've all heard, I think, by now from Jeff Azell. He knows far more about it than I do, so I'll try to be brief. And I was going to wait for him to speak, but for reasons of computer problems, I'll speak briefly. I wanted to talk about very briefly what parallel plane does, because I think it's extraordinarily confusing, and I think it's helpful to know what it does. Basically, imagine a rectangular that's a rectangular prism on a flat lot. You get 35 feet straight up on the sides, and the length and width of your lot. What parallel plane does is means that is essentially capped at 35 feet wherever your lot is at that time. So at that space in that moment on that lot. And so there might be an infinite number of points on your lot. And at each point, parallel plane says you can only be 35 feet above that. And that's really not an imposition at all on flat lots, because they're always going to be 30. It doesn't change. It doesn't change anything for flat lots. It is a extraordinary change for sloped lots. Because what slope lots do is when you turn it, you can't build a flat, you can't build a slanted floor. You can't build a slanted floor. So this triangle that's underneath your slope, what the current code does is it gives you this on top, so you can have a flat house. But the code that the CRC has proposed takes away this triangle from your slope, so that you cannot replace the triangle that you lose on a sloped lot with the triangle above the 35 feet. So essentially, it significantly reduces the buildable volume on a sloped lot, and it doesn't do so on a flat lot, making a very meaningful and substantial reduction in the buildable volume and the value of a sloped lot. If I were a builder and I wanted to come into Rollingwood and I had two options, I would never choose a sloped lot now if this passes, because even with the proposed potential exemption, you don't know if you're going to get it. And so you would never buy a sloped lot if you're a builder now, because of the chance that you cannot build a modern house with a flat first floor on it anymore. It effectively forces split-level home designs on homeowners. And there's a picture that's in the backup materials to the CRCRC presentation that shows what they think houses should look like and what they think houses should not look like. And the one that they think it should not look like looks like every house in Rollingwood. And I think the one they think houses should look like is a split level, which is not what families want. It is not what people moving into Rollingwood want. I don't know anybody that has moved into Rollingwood recently with a family who would choose deliberately a lot that forces you into split level building. That is not to say that there wasn't a problem that needs to be fixed. That is only to say that this isn't the fix to the problem. There are many ways that were proposed, including by other members of the CRCRC, to handle the problem, the perceived problem of a few homes that have hugely imposing walls. We can handle those without imposing parallel plane and significantly reducing the buildable volume and the buildable value on sloped lots. It has not been meaningfully tested. This is what is most shocking to me, is we have effectively one member of the CRCRC who can sort of explain this, and who has concluded based on taking pictures and measuring the height of trash cans that it won't affect anybody, or that it will only affect a few people. Whereas Jeff Ezell has actually taken out the building plans, looked at topographic reports, and determined that a whole bunch of houses in Rollingwood would not be allowed to be built. It's not just a few, it's actually a whole bunch, and probably the vast majority of the recent builds in Rollingwood would not be able to be built if this new rule were forced upon us. The last thing I would say is that this body is the one that the state says should be doing this work. This is the body that the state says. The CRCRC asked for and got an exception to the Open Meetings Act. The state law says that if you don't have to go by the Open Meetings Act, you don't have any authority to actually do anything. You can provide recommendations, but you don't have authority if you go outside of the Open Meetings Act. If you have authority, like this body does, you can't go outside the Open Meetings Act. You actually have to do the work in public. And part of the problem that I've had and that others have had with the CRCRC, and frankly one of the reasons I resigned from the CRCRC, was because of the incessant desire to do what I believe is public government work in private. And so I would just ask that you please sincerely and genuinely take seriously what I think is a statutory duty, to take this issue very seriously, to make sure that you are confident that it doesn't actually harm very many people, to make sure that you are confident that you understand it, and to make sure that you are confident that you're not going to be harming your neighbors and your friends in doing so. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Clinton? Mr. Ezell, or you want to take a crack at this, or?
Yes, sir. Take two. I'm on my cell phone this time, so hopefully this is more clear.
Yes.
Good. Well, great. Thank you all, everyone. I started last time. I said I wasn't in attendance at the April meeting, so I really got engaged following the city council meeting, so in the last 3 months. And since that time, I've pretty much spent way too much time watching every CRCRC meeting, watching council meetings, P&Z meetings, historically, to find out what's going on and how something that got 28% support in the survey has been pushed through. I can tell you that they do not have consensus or a majority support in the community on this proposal. They do not understand how the proposal works. They do not understand the implications. And furthermore, they have not proven anything on a statistical or mathematical basis to where they are getting their data and support. Everything that I have found in the public realm does not support it. It's all found in the presentation that was shared with you. At the city council meeting, they said that there were not enough submitted surveys. There were 274 submitted. There were 330 submitted at the Comprehensive Strike Force. This is a statistically valid sample. Secondarily, they also said that it was the first iteration that went into the public, and that's not true. The survey went out 6 months after CRCRC was formed, and it was 3 months after their public workshop where they held in public in this room you're sitting at and had post boards and all kinds of information on all these questions. The public knows what this is and they do not want it. Just like Ryan just mentioned, I highly encourage y'all to find out where their support's coming from, the impact that it has on our friends and neighbors, and to find something that fixes the problem without creating more. The number of unintended consequences is unknown because they do not know how it really works to existing and future homes. Thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate y'all's support.
Mr. Ezell, could you answer a question for me? Hello?
Yes, of course.
Do you own more than one property in Rowanwood?
Yes, I own 3.
You own 3. Okay.
Yep,
I've always wondered.
yeah. Would you like to hear the story behind that, or are you just trying to paint that as a bad thing?
If you feel like you want to talk about it, it's fine with me.
Sure. We originally bought our home in 2016, remodeled, moved in. Thought we wanted a bigger house, bought one of the last estate lots at the corner of Rollingwood at Inwood, had plans designed for it, determined that's not a home that we wanted, shelved the project, ended up buying a lot on Pickwick last year, and for the last 15 months have been going through the architectural process and have seen the impact that this can have on our friends and neighbors and us specifically. Am I a spec builder? No. Do I intend to build homes and flip them? No. Do I have a alternative motive? No.
Okay, thank you. All right. Is anybody signed up to speak about this? All right. Well, let's see. Is there anything that folks would like to know from the CRC on this item? You, in April, the P&Z meeting, we had proposed, the CRC had proposed a recommendation that was approved here. And then in the April City Council meeting, a number of the public showed up, and we were asked to go back and collect more public input before before it ever went to public hearing. So ever since then, we've been collecting public input. So,
Has anything changed based on that input?
we made a change and then it presented it at a CRC meeting, and then it got roundly criticized, so we kind of pulled that out. For the most part, it has not changed. It's the wording is probably improved in what we've done. We've probably, I would say that we've come up with some documentation that is better than what was presented to you folks in April. A little more concise, maybe a little more to the point as to why it is we're doing what we're doing, or why our recommendations are what they are. But, for the most part, the recommendation pretty much sits the way that it originally sat. Now, we have created a special exception by way of our new interest in special exceptions. We thought that it might accommodate any particular issues that might come up, particularly on extremely sloped lots. We're looking at actually including a second special exception that would have to do with homes that are built in a lot that's on a floodplain or has a drainage easement, and that may be introduced as well. You'll be seeing all of this stuff here on September 4th.
So any special exception that you're talking about that's still being
Yeah, you'll
contemplated is going to be in the code that we're going to get next week?
Actually, the CRC has already voted to put that, the floodplain one add that special exception to it, yeah.
So that'll be in the code language?
Yes.
I'll say I wasn't at the April meeting when it was approved, but I watched it to catch back up. I will say that my takeaway from watching the approval was there was a lot of discussion around what exactly are we approving and how many other opportunities are we going to have to review and discuss these concepts. There was, from a couple people, concerns about just the overall concept and how it's defined, how it's gonna work, how different, depressions in the site and pools and rock outcroppings and those kind of things would be factored into it. And what was discussed then is what you planning and zoning are approving by voting yes to this is to recommend to city council that code be generated. And I think people asked several times, we're gonna have plenty of opportunity to review that, discuss it, weigh in on it. I've got a significant concern that I'm glad coming into this that I'm hearing that we're gonna get code next week, so at least there's a couple of weeks to review it. But I have concerns about the fact that we're gonna discuss this tonight, get code in between now and then, have a public hearing with planning and zoning and city council at the same time, which is something that was recently implemented to speed up things. We have, a fair amount of citizen commentary, questioning this. To be perfectly honest with you, that doesn't feel appropriate to me. I think there should be code that planning and zoning reviews in an independent meeting, has a public hearing, has discussion with, and plenty of opportunity for citizens to comment, then makes whatever its recommendation is. Then city council has the same, so that there's plenty of time for the actual code to be reviewed. I mean, we've talked about this as a city for months and months and months and months, still have a lot of questions, a lot of concerns. And now we're talking about we're gonna get code that we're gonna approve 3 weeks after receiving it. That just, for something that affects every property owner at some level in the city, that just feels honestly totally inappropriate to me. That's my opinion. And by the way, I support changes to the height to rein it in, to make that clear. I still have some concerns about what's proposed. I recognize how much time and effort has been spent in it. I think there's a lot of good in there. I share some of the concerns, maybe not quite to the same degree as some of the opposition that's been voiced, but I do think there has not been nearly enough experts weighing in. I mean, I would like to see code that's written and a report with review of, from an independent engineer, maybe Kay Freeze, in terms of how would this apply, and let's take a number of different examples that have already been built and review that. Because, so far it's some people saying it's gonna impact tons and tons of houses, and it's CRCRC saying it's gonna barely impact any houses, and nobody seems to have any definitive resolution on that. And I think to make this type of change, I think you just gotta go way above and beyond with outside, whether it's architects or engineers or whoever the right people are reviewing the code that's ultimately, written, and trying to determine whether there are any unintended consequences and what those are.
I think you're gonna like when we get to agenda item number 11. It should answer some of it anyway.
Can you give us a little fast forward preview perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, my question on that, which obviously we're not on that, but is when that's gonna happen, because I know there was a suggestion at one of the CRCRC, a strong suggestion from Tom Farrell that there's a public hearing that happens at some point, and I think the CRCRC voted against having that at that time and voted for sending it to council. And it looks like maybe there's gonna be some discussion around changing that.
I'm not sure I agree. That doesn't quite square up with my memory, but I know that Tom was one of the proponents of conducting a workshop. And there were several of us who were not, okay? But,
And it went up for a vote, yeah.
I 2 city council meetings ago, I was doing a review of where the CRC was with all of these things, and was not prepared to actually represent them. And members of city council insisted that we need to move along on this, that we spent enough time on this, and it's time to get it done. So we started redoubling our efforts to firm up a package that could be presented and codified, which is where we are right now.
Yeah, I think at that same meeting, there was, just specifically Tom, but there was a lot of concern expressed about sending it from that last CRCRC, well, I say the last meeting, this was, I'd have to look it up, June meeting, I believe, about sending it to P and Z first before council. Ultimately, y'all decided to send it to council and let them figure it out. You know, now we're talking about after council's voted for it, which also doesn't feel particularly appropriate to me personally. But here we are.
Any other comments?
Well, I actually share the concern about it being so fast, the fact that we're getting it and we only have a couple of weeks to review it before we will have the public hearing. Is there any way we can change the public hearing to like October or something?
So at this time, the city council has, made a motion to set that, that hearing. If we were to not have quorum, that would obviously be grounds for cancellation because we couldn't. But generally, the city council would need to, vote to reschedule that or cancel it, if we wanted to push that to a later date.
Do you have the language that we approved to send to council? Is
Yeah,
that-
there's
do we
nothing,
have that
there's nothing in
available?
our packet here, really.
Sure.
There's-
Yeah,
There's a
not
two,
much.
there's
The
a
language is there.
couple page summary. Well, there's not, the detail that was in the city council meeting is not in our packet.
No,
I
just
went
for
and
the
pulled
sake of my, I mean, I agree with almost all of what Tony said, but for the sake of my, I mean, I remember we had this discussion at that meeting and I had concern about approving it, but was promised by you that we were gonna have another opportunity, many opportunities. I mean, I'll go back and rewatch it, but, verbatim, it was, you're gonna have another you're gonna have chances to
Yeah.
review this. And I also have and I tried to look for it and I couldn't find it earlier, but we approved something, right, to send up as an to draft an ordinance, and I'd like to understand how that compares to where we are today.
It's actually pretty close.
So pretty close and the same or different,
Well,
right?
whenever
So-
people talk about, what, there were essentially three choices listed in our survey for how to measure building height, okay? What the approach would be. And it's essentially an A, B, C kind of thing. And the C one is the approach that we had recommended back in April, and it's the approach that we were recommending still. So that's the biggest part of it, right there. It's just that, just the way you do it. Also, the probably more than reluctance, almost insistence, that no part of a building go above 35 feet.
Where was that? In the survey?
In the survey, there are two questions. One of them is a question that having to do with what is the maximum allowable of 35 feet? Is that appropriate, or is it too much, or is it too little? And if you take, I could talk about the survey all day long, but if you take it's too much and it's just right, put them together, you get 90% of the population say that 35 feet is either, don't go above 35 feet. Don't go above. 35 feet is the maximum that we can tolerate. So that's part of it. Okay, and we already talked about it, and that was part of what was discussed in April. Following that is what's the approach for measuring where that 35 feet starts? And that's the approach, and that's where really most of the argument, the concern has been, is that lots, the perception is that lots that are extremely sloped are gonna be penalized by the way that we're measuring that 35 feet.
That clearly
Can we-
seems to be
can we
the
hear
truth,
from
though.
Ryan?
That lot would be penalized if it has a sloping, topography. Because if you're saying 35 feet,
Yeah.
the previous code basically allowed 45 feet max.
That's right.
Because it allowed a 10-foot rear or wherever it would be,
That's right.
to give you some adjustment.
Yes.
So where I live on Timberline Drive and my neighbor to the right on Timberline Drive, we both have, my neighbor has like a foundation that's literally, it's a one-story house. Foundation is probably 12 feet or more exposed on the side because that's how sloping their lot is.
Sure.
So they haven't rebuilt. It's an older, couple. We haven't rebuilt. We're on the other side. Ours slopes in the back too. We have our first story, basically is garage under part of it, and the rest of it is foundation. So we have roughly 10 feet that we can't live in. Garage is a part of it. So we would be severely penalized because we have a front setback, we have side setbacks, we have a drainage easement, we have heritage trees, and then you have like a building, plot you can build on. So for us, building up, if we wanted to make it bigger, we'd have to do 2 stories, which is effectively 3 stories from the back.
Right.
So to give 35 feet is not nearly enough in the back, whereas in the front it would be fine. So effectively from the street too, 35 feet is what you would look at, you would see, most neighbors would say, oh, that's fine, 35 feet. So when you ask a question like that, is 35 feet too much? They're probably looking at our kind of house too and saying, oh, 35 feet on the front would be fine. But they're not worrying about the back. But someone who owns a lot that has that topography is going to worry about that. Resale, builders, whatever, in the future, they're going to care about that. So that's what I'm saying. It really does impact, I think, a lot more than certain people are thinking. And I think that's what leads into people saying this rush to figure something out. I think a lot of us agree something needs to be done. There are certainly abuses that have been happening. There are houses that have been built that you look at it and you say, well, how does that fit our code? But the vast majority of houses are not like that. There's only several exceptions like that. So I think we are probably smart to take a, measured approach, look at it, make sure we do actually understand what we're doing before we approve things. So I'm on the board too, or board with people who are saying basically like, when it feels too fast, it feels sneaky, it feels like someone's pushing a certain agenda, and it feels like the lack of transparent government. So, I think that has been citizen input on other things in the past. That's why we got the CRC in the first place, is that things going fast and things being done that might be anti to what people were wanting. So basically, yeah, that's just my thought that, yeah, it's going pretty fast. It really is not being presented as these 3 or 4 options that we should choose from. It's not being shown how this is a house, this is what effect it's going to have to it, and we're still trying to chug ahead and just get a result, which doesn't seem to make sense.
Can we hear from Mr. Clinton again? He's been patiently raising his hand.
Thank you, Ryan Clinton, 4714 Timberline. I just wanted to clarify the question about the survey. The survey said, should we consider measuring height a different way? And that is being used as yeses to those are being used as yeses to support parallel plane. I answered yes. I think most people answered yes to that question, because yes, we should be considering how to measure height. That did not mean in any way, shape, or form that I supported parallel plane. Another question is 35 feet just about right, too high, or too low? Most people said just about right. I answered just about right. That was not in any way, shape, or form a vote for parallel plane, which is what Chair Bench is using it as. So he actually is using both yes answers and no answers and combining them to give you what purported public support. He's taking the 35 feet is just about right, yes. 35 feet is too high. So that he's combining those groups to tell you. So basically, regardless, almost how 2 of the 3 answers he's saying support him. Whereas, at least for me, I never in a million years thought that by saying I generally think the rules are right, that what I was supporting was a dramatic change in the rule. The other thing is, they say the report was that's the one that got the most public votes, but the truth of the matter is it got 28% of the public vote. Parallel Plane did. And it's the most restrictive of the three options. You can kind of assume that if there was a vote for a less restrictive option, somebody would choose that one first. If they wanted the most restrictive, they probably would have supported lesser restrictive too. But there's only 28% support for Parallel Plane. You can try to manipulate the numbers all you want, but there was only 28% support for Parallel Plane. Now you can claim it doesn't matter. They also claim in their backup materials that they wrote the question wrong, and so they speculate that if they had written it right, they would have gotten more public support. The fact of the matter is they asked a direct question on whether you want Parallel Plane, and 28% of respondents said yes. The vast majority did not support Parallel Plane. Sure.
I have a question.
Of course.
Why are you so opposed to that parallel plane? Why is that so problematic to you? I don't understand, because, I mean, to me, it seems kind of logical that you could go up and you'd have 35 feet up higher. I don't understand your objection.
Perfectly fair question. I wish I had brought my props, which I didn't. But basically, if you tilt your rectangular prism sideways, okay?
No, just tell me
That's-
why you object to it.
But that's why. It's because if you tilt your rectangular prism sideways, which is how Parallel Plane works on a sloped lot, you remove the ability to build on a percentage of the lot because you are now into the ground. You can't build into the ground, nor can you build a slanted floor, right? You have to build a flat floor, which means that all the triangle between the flat floor and your plane, which is slanted on a lot that is sloped, you cannot build on. All of this volume, 3D volume across the entirety of the lot, you can no longer build on.
Well, why can't you excavate it and build on it?
Well, some people don't have anything to excavate. So if your slot, like Mr. Hall's and mine, slopes down away from the street, there's nothing to excavate. It only works to excavate if you have a hill that goes up against the street. Now, if you do that, I would point out, you cause the exact same problem that the CRC was trying to solve in the first place. Because if you have a hill like this and you excavate into it, now you can have a 4-story facade in the front, right? So if you allow the excavation, you actually create the problem that they were intended to solve. If you don't allow the excavation, if your lot is slanted away from the street, there's nothing to excavate. So what they've done is created a solution that harms a lot more people than it needs to solve the problem of a few imposing walls.
So I've read your letter and everything, but so you're proposing the alternative of what? Can you
Well, I think
explain
there are a
what you
lot,
prefer?
sure, there are a lot of potential alternatives. The way that Austin does it is to take an averaging. So you think, where should the house sit on this lot if I'm looking at it? And mathematically, they take an average of elevations on the lot, and they do it from there. So you kind of have a base of where it should be. The council has already taken the 5 extra feet off that allowed the houses that everybody's complaining about. So in some ways, the problem has already been fixed. You can also have setbacks to 35 feet, which would prevent any wall above 35 feet. So you could have tenting setbacks at 35 feet. Now, the CRC did setbacks at 25 feet. So imagine a lot that goes slanted sideways. This is the place, if you want a relatively flat building, right? This is the place where you have to have a tall facade. Let's imagine it's on a slope lot sideways. You need this to be tall, right? But what CRC has done is this has to be short. So you don't even get 35 feet anymore if your lot is slanted sideways.
Well,
You only get
that's just
25 feet.
On the setback side, on the sides, right?
That's right. Well, it's on effectively every side, the way that's been written. But yes, it goes down to 25 feet on the sides. So in the place where you need it the most, you get the least if your lot is sideways. My point, and you asked me, what could you do? You could ban the fourth story of any house. You could have sidewalls that can only be 35 feet, not a inch more, and you immediately solve the problem that everybody has. No facade, no sidewalls above 35 feet. Immediately that would solve the problem. You could have an averaging. So every single house that people are mad about, if you took the average, rather than letting them take 35 feet from the top, which is what the current code does, if you take 35 feet from the average, every single one of those houses goes down 5 to 8 feet. Plus the 5 that they already got, they're 13 feet down now, lower than they were. Every single one of those houses, no one would be complaining about if they were 13 feet lower. Yet so there are lots of easy things we could do that would not significantly impose a reduction in the buildable volume of slip lots.
Thank you, Mr. Clinton.
Dave, was there any discussion with CRCRC? So I reviewed the survey. Y'all were nice enough to send it to me. I agreed with the survey. I read it. I tried to think through all of it. Complimented y'all on it. Thought it was great. I think y'all have said, you know, with the benefit of hindsight, there's probably some things that would be
Yeah,
done
we could've
different.
done better.
I certainly, you know, I proved it and
Yeah.
would agree with the same. So this is not questioning that or saying anything was done
Sure.
incorrectly or with any intention to mislead whatsoever. So now we've kind of, you know, fast forward however many months now, and there's some confusion, some discussion in the community. Has there been any discussion about a simple height-only follow-up survey to the community with
Oh, no.
some of these options that have been discussed?
No, there has not.
Is that a cost issue or
I
just
don't- I
hadn't come
don't-
up or?
No, I'm gonna, you know, I have to punt this a little bit, but my guess is that there's not a lot of appetite with city council for that kind of thing. You know, what has happened is, everything would have been wonderful with, after we had approved going forward in April with, the recommendation, and they'd be codified and then reconsidered right away. But what happened at the city council meeting was a number of people showed up, and that didn't happen. The codification going away, that didn't happen. What happened were a number of CRCRC meetings where we heard very much the same story, more than once. And we tried to appease those arguments as best we could, and we're effectively rebuffed because we keep coming back to the same solution. That's a fact. We do keep coming back to what you would call a parallel plane as being the best thing for rolling. That's all taken a lot of time. And unfortunately, with open meetings acts and scheduling requirements and things like that, months go by before we get to the point where we're at right now.
Which I think is frankly one of the intentions of the Open Meetings Act, is to make important things like this take a long time, in my opinion.
Well, that might be, and I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that seems counterproductive. But regardless, I mean, here, I'm chairing this group for a reason, because supposedly it's supposed to move something along. Eventually, something's got to come out the other side. We're trying to make that happen. We've been nothing but transparent in all the CRC meetings, and the CRC meetings are held every 2 weeks. And up until that April date, up until that time, nobody had ever come to, I think Mike came to one. And that was it. You know, then all of a sudden you know, people got excited about it. We'll cover this in 11, but we're trying to cover everything that we can. We try to be as transparent as we can, but we're also getting the nudge from City Council, hey, you know, it's time to move along. It doesn't just cost our time, it costs city staff time to do what it is we're doing. Every time we have a meeting, we have to have this space, we have to have that television, we have to have these people taking notes and doing everything that we're doing, everything that we're going through, the process. It's not cheap, and it's not, it's not efficient. So, I can appreciate your concern that it feels like it's being ran through. But this discussion I've been having this discussion pretty much every day since the April City Council meeting. Pretty much every day. And I'm happy to discuss it with any of you at any time. But you know, there's not a whole lot more we can do to it or for it. We're kind of where we are, and,
I think there was one of the city council meetings, maybe I don't know if it was the June or July, or maybe it was May, right after some of this came up, and I think city council said to CRCRC, go see if y'all can kind of come up with some compromises that address some of the slope block concerns,
That's
right?
right.
And,
yeah.
but I guess what you're saying is nothing's really changed of substance since April to this?
We had that was the April City Council meeting where people got to the podium, and there were 3 takeaways from it. One was, go back and, listen to the public some more about this. Number 2, see if there are opportunities for compromise with what the public is suggesting, okay? And then 3, consider the use of special exceptions to accommodate those things that don't work, all right? We did all those things. Like I said, we actually did. We had a number of the subcommittee that worked on the building height went through a number of iterations of how to handle extremely sloping lots, what we're supposed to do. We had extra planes going in there. We had 45-degree angles and cutoff points and all kinds of things y'all have never seen. And then decided that it was too hard and it was too complicated. But we did bring one back for extremely, that had to do with as the slope of a lot increased, we would give some forgiveness on that. That was not acceptable. Not acceptable. You know, the people that were coming to our CRC meetings, it was the same people. Only 5 people. Those 5 people were not satisfied with it. That's it. You know, you're still saying the same thing. It's still a parallel plane. Okay. So we wrote an even more ambiguous special exception that says, look, if what we're providing here, if what the rules are not workable on your lot is so difficult that it can't be built using the rules that we're proposing here, then you can go to the Board of Adjustment and seek a special exception to build your plan.
Board of Adjustment doesn't work.
That's right, I was at that council meeting. You know, I wanted to say something. You asked about putting back another survey. You know, I think that as a democracy, our population depends on their elected officials making intelligent decisions, and I don't think that we have to burden them with every single decision. If they really object so strongly, have them come in and talk. But I personally don't think that sending out another survey is the answer. And 2, I respect the parallel thing, the issues. I have to think about that a little bit more. But just from perspective, I just want you to remember or to remind you all that before we had a sewer system, we had septic. And a lot of those lots would never have been built on because we could not get septics on them. So what we have now is actually much more permissible than it's ever been in the past. And we need to be grateful for some of the building opportunities that we have. And I also think that we as a commission and as city council, certainly in their responsibility, we need to respect what other people's property. There's so much of this discussion, to me, from among you all, it's all me, me, me. It's my lot. We can't do this, we can't do that. But what about the effect on the neighbors? You know, some of these buildings, if you would come to my house, like Dave has, and Brooke has, and I mean, and see what they did to us. It's horrible. And it is much higher than 35 feet. There were no restrictions. And you all are so protective of your rights, but you're talking about your rights and not the community's rights. And I object to that. I feel like it's very egocentric, some of these discussions. I'm sorry, but I'm feeling that way. And I think that yes, we should be able to get to some compromise regarding parallel or tinting, and I respect that there are some ways to accomplish what we want. But I personally don't like the idea of these houses that are being built. We might as well be downtown. You should see, come to my house. Fortunately, my husband and I had enough money that we were able to mitigate the situation. But it cost us almost $50,000. And there are a lot of people who cannot afford that. We had to get an architect, we had to get steel and beam, and it's a good solution. But how many people have that money? Not very many people have that money. And it was, to me, an issue of community. So what y'all seem to be proposing is that every house in Rollingwood should be able to go 35 feet, regardless of what kind of impact it has on the neighbors. And, oh, let's get them as close together as possible. We have big lots here. I don't understand what the movement is to have these huge houses. And another thing I think is crazy is how big these people build these houses. You guys have no idea how quickly your children grow up and leave. And then you've got these incredibly large spaces to maintain, for taxes, for insurance, for everything. It's absurd. So, but it's the community. What is it we want? A neighborhood? Or do we want an urban setting with all these houses that are skyscrapers? It's just kind of bizarre to me. But yeah, we're gonna maintain our personal property rights so we can build blah, 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 whatever. I think we need to come to some solutions, but just to keep talking and talking and talking is not giving us solutions.
I'm worried about my neighbors. I'm on a flat lot. I'm worried about my neighbors. I'm not
Yeah,
being
come
selfish.
to my house. Come to my
I'm
house.
100%
Yeah, I'm
in
on a
support.
flat lot.
I'm
It's
100% in
like-
support of changes.
Yeah, and
To
for the
the-
Yeah,
record, G,
100%.
I told you, I think the first time we met, that I almost apologized, even though I have nothing to do with that, of how hideous that is,
Oh,
right?
it's
And
horrible.
I don't think there's a single person here on the dais, or even Mr. Clinton or Mr. Rozelle, who would support what you have next to you. I think everybody has the same incentive and want to eliminate those sorts of things. And I mean, I appreciate it's awful. Like I told you that, and so you know,
I think I know where you are now, and it is awful.
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think we're
so-
looking for mitigating unintended consequences here, though, too, because nobody wanted that, but we got it. But if we go ahead and do something that causes another problem, but really doesn't necessarily fix your problem in the same way, we're actually harming a lot of people potentially. And like, if we don't know who's impacted by this change, whose house is now non-conforming and things like that, maybe we're causing more damage. That's why I said going too fast. I mean, we can't undo what was done there.
No,
So
but we can prevent.
right.
But
Right,
just
and
so-
I'm not.
so-
Which is-
I'm
yeah,
not
exactly what
saying
we're
there's
doing.
no change. I'm just saying, like, you know, I really think, I feel it personally because my house would be affected. I haven't built. My house is like 2,600 square foot. I've lived there 8 years. We think it's a great size for us, but you know what? When I sell, I don't want my market value to be also impacted because now I have to build. Somebody would have to build this crazy thing. You know, so that's what I'm thinking. And honestly, my neighbor, the next door, I'm pretty sure that house is like for their kids or whatever. Eventually, that's going to be the thing. But there's no way that house will stay there. If somebody's going to tear it down, somebody's going to build. That lot is sloped like this and to the back. And like to build, I mean, they're going to be almost like down in the ravine. So like, I think people like that who are my neighbors and all of our neighbors and our stakeholders in this who haven't been here at a meeting, but I'm their neighbor. I want to also protect them and, you know, make sure that, you know, what they're going to build, because even if they built 45 feet or whatever, if they built it toward the back, it wouldn't tower over anybody except for maybe us, but not even us because we're up on the hill in our, you know, just the way the topography works. So there are a lot of exceptions and different things, and we are all neighbors. I'm not a spec builder. You know, I haven't even done any remodeling, or not remodeling, but I haven't done any new construction on my lot. I don't anticipate doing it, but just because I know, having dealt with like the McMansion in Austin and how much of a pain that was, like, cause I used to live in Austin before, and what that kind of tenting and this parallel plane or whatever will do is it'll make one style that kind of works, and everybody will build that style. So, that's what I'm worried about, is the unintended consequence that everyone wants to help the situation you're talking about, and I don't think anyone that's here is against that, but the question is this solution the well thought out, reasoned solution that people can agree on and that would agree on if they knew and were properly motivated? If I weren't on this panel and had a flat lot, I'm busy, I probably wouldn't be here. And I think that's why a lot of our neighbors aren't here that have like the flat lots.
You know, I wouldn't have been here.
Yeah, so what you're gonna hear from mostly is
You
either
might-
people
you might have been here,
right,
I don't
who've
know.
been affected by it, or who have the slope lot who think, oh wow, this is maybe something that's bad for, for me
Yeah, I
and for
think
my
we-
neighbors.
I
You know,
think we all
anyone
want
else.
to do the work to figure it out, and you even made the comment that it feels rushed,
Yeah.
and I definitely know I feel
Well,
that way. That,
just not getting the codes
Well-
in a timely fashion.
Yeah.
yeah, so I mean, I guess
I guess
Like-
somebody who's been working on this for probably hundreds of hours doesn't feel rushed at all.
well, yeah, but I mean, but you have to be receptive to the community input.
I
and
do,
you,
yeah,
you
that's-
said
that's
you
true.
said you
That's
wanted
true.
it to be cheap and efficient,
Yeah.
and I mean, this is going to affect billions of dollars of
Oh,
property
and
values.
I don't agree that that's true, but you
We
can
can do the
say that.
math.
You can say that. No.
How many houses in Rollingwood?
No.
400?
No, there is value in building a house that fits the topography. Even if that means that house could have conceivably been much larger if you changed the topography to make the house work. If you build to the topography, you'll find yourself with a nicer house and one that is more easily saleable than one that is just some hulk that is stuck into the side of a hillside.
However, I don't think these rules make you build to the topography. These rules make you build however the rule says. So that's different than
we
the
start-
topography or the designer. Like if an architect came out and looked at a lot, they might propose something that has a very large side on one side
Right.
that might not be allowed in this code, but would be actually very attractive and would not be a harm to anyone else. But the code is not going to allow it because of the, whatever exact rules that come out. So
There
Where-
are some gorgeous houses that are on Rowanwood that do build to the topography, and there's a lot of them that have been built in the last 5 years. Just beautiful places, and clearly expensive. And when you look at them, you say, "Man, I would love to have that house. I wish I had that house." It's not, and they're not the ones that are some giant block stuck on the top of a hill.
but they're also built under the current rules and not the
But they
anticipated
were built
rules.
under the current rules. Here, the reality of it is, and I shared this with City Council, is that our maximum height is 35 feet. There's almost no place around here that's got a maximum height of 35 feet. 35 feet's extremely generous. There are some exceptions in some areas where you can go up past 30 feet, but that's on an exception basis. Now, what's being proposed and some of these other ways of being able to measure what that 35 feet is always makes the 35 feet something more. I explained to City Council the other day, my lot, almost perfect to most people. If you look at it, you would say, well, that's a perfectly flat lot. But the reality of it is, my lot has 6 feet of relief on it. It's not a lot, but it's 6 feet.
not
You know,
on the
from one
buildable
end-
area.
Huh?
Not on the buildable area.
Oh,
Maybe
yeah.
from
Oh.
street to rear lot line.
Well,
but
Rick, yeah, actually, I have to go down a little bit, yeah.
a couple feet maybe.
We had to fill, yeah, in the buildable area. If I moved that house around, I could find 6 feet of relief.
Well, I doubt it, but maybe.
Okay,
We'll
but,
see.
okay, bear with me. The point being, that if I wanted to, I could take that house, or I could find the buildable area that would allow me, instead of building to 35 feet, to 38 feet. Because I would be averaging across the slope of the lot. I'd be averaging across the buildable area. And I'd say, okay, well, I get 38 feet. Now, 35 was plenty, but I can get 38 now. Look at that. My huge house can be huger. What's the point of all this?
Okay, you're very emotional.
I am. I am.
Can we
I
just
am
go
emotionally
back?
attached to this, but
I can tell. Can we just go back to the meeting that we had where we were effectively promised opportunity to discuss and review, which to me also means take citizen input, have, you know, I totally disagree with this needs to be cheap and efficient.
Okay.
Can we not do that work? Can we not have a
Okay.
chance with this body to do
We,
that?
you and I, and even the CRC work for city council, okay? We get, you work.
I feel like we
you-
work for the,
you-
I feel like we work for the residents, constituents,
but you work at the pleasure of city council.
but at the
You're-
pleasure,
that's
but
right.
not for.
That's right. And, you know, when we are summoned, CRC is summoned to present to city council where we are, we get some guidance from those folks. And those folks, I recommended that we take this through P and Z first. And they said what I said, that we're using up too much time. It's time to bring this to closure. How can we get this to the public, for a public hearing more quickly? And that's what we're doing. That's what the
Did you
schedule
remind
said.
them that you told us we'd have an opportunity to discuss?
No, I did not. I did say that was my preference, but I did not remind them of that, no. I didn't. As I say, I work for them. I do.
If I might.
Let's hear it.
What I understood P and Z to do at that prior meeting was to say, this proposal from CRCRC should get drafted. It wasn't a vote as to the substance. It was a vote to get this in a draftable form.
To make some progress.
Yes. And same thing happened at council this last meeting. It wasn't a vote on the substance. It's a vote to get it in an ordinance form so that we put a finer point on these issues and have a base document we can work from it. At least that's what my vote was for. It's my recommendation, and that was what my vote was for. We've had so much back and forth and a lot of ill feelings at this point in time that it seems to me the way forward is to, and we wanted it done by this meeting, in advance of this meeting, but it didn't happen, to get the recommendation for CRCRC into an ordinance form, and so we have a base document and we can move forward from there and consider things like, is this the right mark? Do we need to add tinting? How much tinting? Is it 25 feet or 35 feet? Those kind of issues can, in my opinion, can be more readily debated when we have a common ground to start from. And so the council has not made a decision on any substantive issue. We've made a decision that what's come out of CRCRC, the way forward from this point is to get it in an ordinance form. Then it'll come, that's what we'll, we're in the awkward position since it wasn't ready today, which council wanted it ready today. We're hoping that it's there far enough in advance of the September 4 meeting that the public and y'all and the council can have a reasonable debate about what's there and where we go from that point. So I just wanted to at least make my understanding clear.
Thank you. I guess that being the case, that, you know, it sounds like you approved in essence sort of what we approved. Let's get an ordinance together so
Yes.
that we can make some progress,
Exactly.
so we can have a discussion, which is great. Why then are we trying to combine these meetings and, you know, approve
Because
this
here's
without
why to do that.
ample time for real discussion?
The concern is this ordinance change affects everybody in the community. Everybody has to get a mailed notice. we'd rather, you know, that's a couple of $1,000s just for the mailing. And so if we can do one mailing for one joint meeting, then that doesn't preclude as many additional public hearings as we feel or need to get necessary. It just fulfills the statutory requirement that there be a public hearing with a mailed notice to everyone. And so that's the thought that, you know, a joint public hearing would be more cost-effective for the city. So,
I have a question. I know you can't speak for all of city council, but, and maybe the only way we can have a joint meeting is if it is a public hearing. Is that true? Could we have a joint meeting where there's no
I don't
public
know the
hearing,
answer
so
to
no
that.
action can be taken?
I don't know the answer to that.
Because in my experience on planning and zoning, we've had a public hearing when it's at least generally intended or thought that there's a high probability that action is going to be taken. So maybe I'm misperceiving seeing this joint meeting triggered me to say the intent from city council is they want us to come in one meeting, review an approved code rather than discuss it and refine it over a period of time, debate it.
I think that's been the thought process in previous times. I'm of the view as a sitting council member that I shouldn't be taking any substantive decision until I've heard that public hearing. You know, it doesn't make sense to have the public hearing after decisions have been made or after you've gotten to the point where this is the code unless we've really missed something here. So I think there's a change in philosophy about that the public hearing ought to be the hearing where we hear everybody and hear everything. And, you know, yes, changes can come subsequent to that. And yes, we want to be far enough along that at least these are the topics and here's the width of agreement or disagreement on that topic, and then have, you know, that public hearing. I think we're at that point, but I think it's somewhat a change in philosophy as to when in the process that public hearing ought to occur. And, you know, I'm of the view that you get the public input in at the front end, and then you work toward achieving what that public comment supports. So that's how I would answer that question.
I
It's
think
interesting that
us
it's
and
changed.
city council having an opportunity to talk amongst together sounds good to me. I guess the part
And it
that's scary to
saves-
me is if there's an intent or an expectation from city council that we're gonna
Not on my part.
approve code language. in
Not
the
on my
first
part.
Pass, yeah.
And we have our community, when they want to be engaged, they know how to be engaged. That is to say, it's also a savings to the community that they talk both to planning and zoning and the city council at the same time, along with all their neighbors, instead of having repeat performances expected as decisions get made. So I would say that also.
That's good context. I feel like I remember one of the first joint meeting we had, I thought I remembered there being consideration that this will be more efficient so that we don't have to let planning and zoning have a public hearing to make a decision, then city council have a public meeting and make a decision, and spreading that out. So it was let's make a decision all together at once to speed that up, which I'm not a huge fan of. If it's more of let's get everybody together, community, council and commission to all talk about this, I think that's actually a really good idea.
But we don't have to notice that, right?
That was my question is, are we
Do
noticing it
do we have
because
to
you
notice
can't
that?
have a joint meeting together without noticing?
So
I mean, I think once you notice it, you create the expectation of action.
That was my thought.
So if there
Right.
is no expectation of action, like you
No.
said, then why are we noticing it?
Right, so the only thing that has to happen, there has to be a joint public hearing at that time, and actually, city council cannot act until P&Z makes a recommendation. So if at that meeting, P&Z doesn't wanna make a recommendation, Then at that point, nobody acts yet until P and Z makes their recommendation and the city council
Would
can.
we have to renotice under that scenario?
The public hearing would have already, the state requirement had been taken care of. Of course, we could always go above and beyond and do more things, but the state law requirement of having that joint public hearing and noticing it appropriately is fine. Like, it's done, it's taken care of, and then there can be much more discussion, things can be refined. P and Z has to make a recommendation before the city council does. So it could all happen in one meeting, but it doesn't have to. It can be however, as long as the order is joint public hearing, P and Z action, then city council action.
If we got code language, next week, let's say, and had that meeting, and we had a good, robust discussion, maybe people debated 25, 35, 15, whatever, and no action is taken, and the public hearing has occurred, would there have to be another public hearing if the code language comes in saying 35 and then we all agree it's going to be 30 or 25? Is there not another public hearing to let the public know that what they reviewed before the other public hearing is now different, the language?
The language that'll be posted for that public hearing is gonna say something like, building height and related provisions that would give a reasonable person of the public enough, information to know, oh, they're gonna be talking about this at this meeting. But no, unless you guys decide to add in something that was not noticed at all, we decide, oh, we wanna put in this ordinance, something else that has not anything to do with that notice language, that would trigger a new public hearing requirement. But if it all stays in the same family of building heights and those related provisions, it would not need to go back through the public hearing process. That would be kind of a discussion to have at that level then at that point, more of a policy discussion on, do we feel like this has changed so much that we should go back through that process?
And so you mentioned at the beginning that the intent would be send out the notice, have the code ready for citizens to review, link to that, on the website, and so then that could be a living document. that
Yes, it can.
Could be passed in some different form in the future.
That is correct.
Thank you. That makes me feel a little better.
Me too.
Good.
I am curious, so a little bit more on history. I know that we've kind of had the parallel plane be the focus for a period of time now. Can you take us back to when the initial discussions were happening around, obviously there are other changes that could be made to our current code that would shrink the buildings that have happened in different ways. What was was there talk about keeping a version of what we have, shrinking it, whether it be 35 to 30 or the 10-foot adjustment to 5 feet or 0 or 3 feet, and then some version of tenting to, on top of that? One of my concerns is we're kind of rewriting the whole thing to this whole new concept that creates the potential for unintended consequences, where we have something in place that you could shrink to try to solve the problems that people are, objecting to and what have you.
Well, going back to the very beginning, there was some concern P&Z and City Council was starting to get letters from the public about the size of houses that were being built, and that their folks were losing their privacy and so on, because the way houses were being built were different from what they had been being built in previous years. So, you may remember this, I think it was before I was even chair of this commission, that I brought up the thing, I'm looking at building heights. This is what people are talking about, and here's maybe some things that we could do, that we ought to be talking about as far as changing the way that we handle building heights. Without getting into changing the height itself or the measurement, just some things. And I made a presentation to you all, and you took it, and it was fine, and I went to City Council and did the same thing with them, showed them, I went to P&Z and showed this to them, and there's some interest in all that. And then the idea of starting a separate committee to look at this more deeply came maybe several months after that. And then I actually Brooke and I actually wrote the charter for the CRCRC. It was to primarily look at what the codes are on the books and are they still appropriate for what's going on in Rollingwood today. Probably with the biggest impetus to doing this was building. So putting together a survey and so on after we got a group of folks together and so on, and we started thinking about, well, what kinds of things will we be considering, and you know, and there was the method for measuring building height, there was the height itself, there was FAR, whether you know we wanted to reduce the bulk of buildings. Did we want to do tenting? We intentionally left the word tenting out of the survey because we thought it was a hot button, and it was in those days. And just try to feel the public out of where the appetite or tolerance would be for doing something about what we thought we were charged with, was trying to manage the overall way that houses sat on a lot. And a lot of, frankly, what I had presented prior to the creation of CRC actually survived through some of that. The actual, I think the graphic that we use in the survey is one that I'd come up with probably a year prior to the survey coming out. The other graphics, Alex Robinette did, but I'll take
Yeah, I
credit
guess
for
I'm
some of
just
those
curious
design
more,
ones.
you know, how did y'all gravitate to parallel plane versus
Well, we
assume
started
you'll talk
looking,
about other
we
items?
looked at a lot of cities to see if there were other cities that had similar topography to what we have and what they were doing in order to manage their building heights. And parallel plane is a fairly consistent approach to it.
So that was the most common in y'all's
I can't tell you what's most common. I can tell you that we looked at an awful lot of places.
I'm wondering if y'all discussed in depth other ideas other than parallel plane in the early days.
Did we discuss in depth?
Or were they all versions? You mentioned a bunch of other discussions that we, you know, couldn't see that had all different other
Yeah, there were the things.
angles
okay,
being
there's-
drawn.
Yeah, you can,
I'm just wondering if there's any discussion around keeping the structure we have now with
The
changes
biggest-
to the
I
height.
think the biggest complaint
setback.
that we were hearing in the survey and just from people in general was, you know, this 10-foot rule, okay? That, you know, okay, so we're talking about a 35-foot high building, but it's not 35 feet, it's allowed to be 45 feet, okay? And the reason it's allowed to be 45 feet is because the rule was written that way. You say, okay,
If you have 10 feet of slope across the
Yeah.
building.
if you have,
If what?
well, it's this way. Effectively allows you to have as many feet as you want, up to 10 feet, provided that the slope accommodates that. If the slope says that, you know, you've got 6 feet of relief, then you're allowed to have 6 feet of forgiveness. That's it, you know, so up to 10 feet, okay? And then past that, then, I guess you'd have to go to the Board of Adjustment or something, I don't know, but it was straight up, 35 feet, you know, to 45 feet. So we're looking at houses in Rollingwood that seem to be the biggest problem. We're saying, well, what could we have done that we would have kept that from happening? And some of the stuff that's being suggested, you know, if you used, say, you know, a sloping average, you know, you would you would be able to manage some of that bulk downward, but you probably wouldn't get it all. So we thought that the parallel plane did a better job of handling the 10-foot relief issue by getting rid of it completely. And that we know that there are other cities who have used that approach and it works pretty well for them. You say, well, okay, well, if you got other hilly areas that are using this, why shouldn't we? And we're talking in high, you know, my original example was from Aspen, Colorado. And it's, you know, and their land prices are much higher than ours. So the money involved in these things are much greater than what we're considering. But it works for them, and they rewrote their code 2 years ago. So, how much consideration did, you know, can I tell you how many hours we spent looking at the different variances? we spent a lot of time looking at different houses and what how it would have been managed downward if we could have done it. You know, Mike had mentioned his place and his lot and what it looks like, okay? And I can appreciate it's a challenge, there's no question. But you know, you go, what is it, to the end of where Riley meets, Rollingwood Drive, where there's that house there in the corner, it's a stucco house and all that, and it's got a backyard, it's a 45-foot drive. And one of the first letters we got was from the person who lived behind there and said, look what they've done. These people are looking straight down to my backyard. That's probably one of the things that got some of this discussion started, besides the one on Park Hills. But,
That one's always been really interesting to me, because if you go look at that, and if you cut 15 feet off the top of that house, it's still completely overwhelming to the
It
one
is, it's
behind
an
it, because,
overwhelming house.
I mean,
Hey,
that one, unless somebody rebuilt a single-story house, there's no solving
it's
that
too
specific.
high.
You might even still see it to the back.
Yeah, you would, yeah, the other house did.
The house is
yeah.
too high, but you know what? If we went with a different approach to managing that house, how is it, we went to some kind of an averaging and stuff like that, it's still look pretty much the same. It might come down a couple of feet, but you'd still have the issue.
That one would be a tricky one to build on with a parallel plane.
It's not tricky. You know, everyone says that, you know, and
Do y'all have
the
examples?
beauty of our group is that we have two professional architects working with us to test everything that we're doing. And they're coming up with these ideas. This is what works. You can do this. You know, they look at a house and they see the way that it's built and they say, that's lazy. Nobody worked at designing that house so it would fit into that topography. That's just lazy architecture. If they moved the whole thing, if they just took the thing and they reversed it and put this side on this side, the whole thing would work a whole lot better and it would you know, work with the topography. Why didn't they do that?
Maybe the homeowner didn't want them to.
Huh?
Maybe the homeowner, maybe it didn't have anything to do with the designer, maybe it's the homeowner.
Well, that's right,
I don't
because,
know.
well then, but,
Yeah.
and you know what? And there's no rules, right? I mean, because the rules allow them to do it. The rules, and what we're saying is, well, wait a minute, well, maybe the rules are wrong. You know, you can change a homeowner's mind if in fact there are rules in place that make that happen. I know for a fact that there's some of the architects that are being enlisted right now to do some of the work that have been recent purchase places have actually challenged the homeowners that are buying these things and said, you know, this is what we think you ought to, these are high-end architects, okay? If you build the house this way, you know, it'll really look good on this slope and all that, and you'll still have a city view and all these things. And the builder and the homeowner or the person who's asking the design to be built is saying, I want the house bigger. I want more square footage. I want it to be as big as it can be. I want a big box on my property. That's what I want. That's what we're trying to prevent. That's it. That's the bottom line. We don't want that. We don't want big boxes on the property because, you know, that's not it. That's not the answer.
I have a question. I know the special exception discussion from the city council to me was very relevant and very applicable to many of the situations in Rollingwood where we have these dramatically sloped lots. So, for example, the issue with the parallel plane, thank you. Could the code be written in such a way that any lot necessitating a parallel plane design of some sort be considered to be relevant for the special exception, and so that then that could be taken out of the general language for the general code, so that those special exceptions are considered independently. And for example, what Mike said, you know, if there's no impact on the house behind you and you,
There's no house.
who cares?
Right.
Nobody cares.
Right.
So I'm just wondering if we can carve out some of these more difficult scenarios and relegate them to that special exception condition, that we really solve our own problem.
I think you're going back to, what the public comments were early on, whatever was, is that, you know, what it is you're doing is, you're really hurting the extremely sloped lots with this parallel plane concept. And again, you know, we had put together a proposal that accommodated extreme lots defined by some slope, and started off with 20%, and then the architects liked 18%, and then the architects ratcheted it back to 15%. And then we proposed that, gave that to the public, and says, if you've got a 15% slope on your buildable area, you're allowed to do such and such, such and such. And it was rejected. There are, you know,
Rejected
there
by
are-
who?
by the 5 people who have consistently come to the CRCRC meetings to complain about what we're proposing. The people that have been protesting what we're recommending.
People,
just
do
a-
you mean residents or you
The
mean people
residents,
on
the
the
residents, the
CRCRC?
residents who are
Okay,
coming
so
to the-
residents coming, 5 residents coming and saying, we don't like this solution, we don't like that solution.
2 of them
Okay.
are here this evening.
Okay.
2 of them are here this evening. Okay? But there's only 5 people altogether that we've heard from.
How many
all
come
this
in
time.
support routinely?
I'm sorry?
How many people come in support of the recommendations?
We've only had 1 person come in support of the recommendation.
So it's 5 to
Um,
1.
Okay.
Well, but they're, if
know.
they're in
Can do it.
support, they're not gonna
That's
raise.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, you know, that sounds like that's something, but I don't think it is. I think, you know,
I don't
if you're,
know. I
if you're
mean-
against a particular change, you're gonna be more ready to come, not necessarily.
But if there's
We're
a,
not- we're
if
not
there's
having a
a,
whole
if there's
bunch
a
of people lining
furor
up
against
behind us.
these houses and there's as much support as the survey or your interpretation thinks there is, then
Yeah.
one might think there might be people showing up in
Yeah.
support.
I don't know how, you know, there was the question about whether or not we wanted to go back and do another survey that was just exclusive building height or the issues around it. And, one, I don't think that there's appetite for it, but I don't know.
Why do you think there's not appetite? I mean, there was a huge appetite to make a change, right? I mean, most people said, we wanna fix the problem, right? I mean, I think everyone who's interpreted the survey.
And so far as I know, there are 5 people who are against the proposal. As far as I know, there are 5 people in
Maybe
Rowan
you're,
who have showed up to tell me that what we're doing is the wrong thing.
but, no, but to be fair, the vast majority of residents support a change. I don't even think the people who, let's call them the other people for now,
Okay.
I don't believe that even they don't think that we need some change. So I think the vast majority,
Yes.
maybe almost everybody
Yes.
in the neighborhood
Yes.
wants some change.
Yes.
So given that, why do you think there's no appetite for more engagement?
I'm not saying there's not more, more engagement.
I mean, now that
We're-
it's
Okay,
funneled
there
down,
was a
it's
city
more
coun-
specific.
Again, there's a city council meeting, a number of people came, discussed. You know, most of the people who were at who made comment at that city council meeting in April, we never saw them again. They promised they'd come to the CRC meetings the next time. They did not come. People were phoning in. You know, this is what I think. Da, 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 da. You know, okay, fine. Come to the meeting. Tell us. Give us some new ideas. Do what, you know, we're interested. They didn't come. I think that we've bent over backward to give the public an opportunity to comment on what we're doing. And I take the fact that folks aren't coming in support of us as effectively tacit approval. If I'm not against it, why would I come? Well, it's fine. Sounds like they're headed down the right track. Sounds like they're headed down the right path. If I know about it at all. All I can say is we're doing what we can, you know, and while we're doing it, building plans are being submitted for approval. And we're still in the same place. We still got that 10-foot rule. We still got everything. time marches on, and we've still got the same old thing, and and nothing's gonna change. Nothing's gonna change until we get something approved.
Yeah, I think everyone wants to do that.
Yeah, I think they do too. How long do you think it takes? It would have been lovely to have had this discussion last month whenever we had the P and Z training, okay? But we couldn't have the P and Z training because we didn't have counsel. Counsel wasn't available. So we had a P and Z meeting without counsel. These are the kinds of wrenches that get thrown into our gears, slowing us down. We could have been having this same very discussion a month ago, but we couldn't do it because we couldn't have a meeting without council present.
Can we hear from Mr. Clinton again? He's been holding his hand up for a really long
All
time.
right, okay.
Ryan Clinton, 4714 Timberline. I just want to speak to the comment that I find infuriating, which is the suggestion that there's demeaning the people who show up at public meetings. It is an insult to every single resident of this city that someone would sit up here as chair of this commission and insult people for coming to meetings. It is incredibly disrespectful. It's the same disrespect that we get with the chair when we meet with him in private. And it is a shut up and go away mentality. And it is unbelievably infuriating. We were told, you better come to the meetings, now's your shot. So we come to the meetings, and when we do, and when we give the exact feedback that he just said nobody gave, we're told, no, you're just wrong. Well, you can't have it both ways. Either you want public participation or you don't want public participation. But when the public comes and participates and they're told effectively, shut up and go away, as we just heard, that's the way that we've been treated throughout this process. As far as how the public interacts with commissions, I've been in and out of government my whole life. The chair has not. I've been on commissions my whole life. I've been going to commissions for 25 years in Austin. That's how I met Mike 20-something years ago. And it's hard to get the public to come to a commission meeting. I don't know how many times you guys have had 5 people come that know a lot about a subject and come testify to you. My guess is 0. I've asked 2 former city council members, how many times did you have 5 people that came fully informed that could debate line for line, task for task with you in your entire time on city council? You know what the answer was? 0. So to suggest that only 5 people come here is just so insulting and disparaging, and it's just as disparaging as suggesting that we shouldn't have public meetings, because that just slows us down. The Open Government Act is there for a reason, and as that is because public decisions should be made in front of the public and not in backroom deals. And what we get from this commission is the subcommittee of 3 decided this, so that's the way it's going to be. And no, none of the rest of us can even explain it to you how it works, but the subcommittee did, so that's how it's going to work. I've been on commissions where I would love to have 5 people to come and speak to us and share their knowledge with us. Another thing is that we've talked to a lot of people in this community. You know what most people say? It's not my issue, man. I've already built my house. I already got mine. I mean, I can't I got time with my kids, I got time at work. I'm sorry, you're right, it sucks, it's not fair, it's not what I would support, but I just can't make it my issue. I've got other things that I gotta worry about. There's nobody coming here and blazing saying, yeah, I've looked at all these maps and they're right, it doesn't hurt anybody. Nobody, there's not a single person. There's only one person claiming that it doesn't hurt anybody. No one else can explain how it works. No one else can explain it. That person even just uses lines on trash cans to determine whether it works. I hope that you treat the public better than the chair does, because it's disgusting. It's really, truly insulting and disgusting. Thank you.
I just want to go on record that if I've insulted anybody, I certainly apologize. That is not my intention, and I have always welcomed public input. And if it's been read differently, I apologize for that. All right. Do we have any more discussion on this item? I'm glad we did.
I don't feel like we've even just gotten even into the substance of what it is.
Well, I have
Well, all it
one
was was
specific
stepping up,
question. So none of this stuff was in our
All right.
packet, but I pulled the packet from the last council meeting as well as the packet from our April meeting. There's a summary in our current packet, and it's a little, they're all three in different formats, so it's hard to try to see if anything's changed from piece to piece, but the city council one, you know, there's this picture here, which I think is from, that may have been in the survey.
Those are the examples.
I think that's from the survey.
Yes, those are the examples from the survey, yes. They are exactly those graphics here.
So this one, you know, it's got the red line is existing grade, and then it's got proposed grade for the bottom of the house here. And then, you know, the language in here says, building height is the vertical distance from the original native ground surface, which would be the red line, or finished grade, whichever is lower. So in this case, it'd be finished grade, so you can only be 35 feet from finished grade, but this is showing it as the tent is 35 feet from the existing grade.
Right.
And then there's another picture in here that says this is a recent build on a highly sloped lot that conforms to the parallel plane proposal.
Right.
And this right here says that it's, well, of course I don't have my glasses, it says that it's 40 feet tall, right here.
That's, okay.
And like this, the reason this popped up is because I was thinking about Jeannie's concerns, and I'm just wondering how this parallel plane option has a
That
40-foot
says-
wall.
Yeah, this, okay.
And is it because of the
That-
excavation?
That 40 feet. I don't have my glasses here, but
That says 40 feet.
yeah. That 40 feet,
So if that's 40 feet, then from here to there is even more than 40 feet.
that's 35 feet above existing grade.
Yeah, but not, but this says existing grade or finished grade, whichever is lower.
Whichever is lower, yeah.
So this would
Yeah.
be whichever is higher in this picture, right? The
So
way this is drawn?
whichever is lower, it says, is what you wrote.
Yeah, that's because that's what it says on the page prior. It says this is below
This
grade,
is
so I was
where-
trying
yeah, so really, yeah, it really should have been from here. And this would have been below grade, all right?
so then this would not conform.
Well, here's the thing. This is the grade, all right? We are inside, we're cut into the hillside here. If you're looking at, this is gonna be subterranean, all right? So your 35 feet is here, that 40 feet, I don't know why she put that there, but it should be 35 feet there from that yellow line. And then this
Well,
would be
that says-
below.
well,
So
that's
what-
what- that's- 'cause
so
this
what we're
says-
saying, I think what her point in all that was, is that you can actually build greater than 35 feet provided you put it underground.
But that's not what this core kind of tenet of this language says. It says, I mean, the number one definition is the vertical distance from the original native ground surface or finished grade, whichever is lower.
Okay, and the finished grade, but the finished grade, I believe that might be mismarked, but the finished grade is what's gonna be on the exterior of the house, not the interior of the house.
I thought we
But
were
that's what's
taking
showing
an
this is
infinite
40
number of
feet.
points throughout the house. I mean, that's your concept, is, we're
That
gonna,
is it, yeah.
so then the finished grade is the basement. I mean, it's not some magical place 5 feet above the basement floor, it's the basement floor, right?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So then I guess that house isn't, what you're saying, it's not compliant.
So
Not with that definition, it's not. I mean,
I don't know if this answers the question, but as I read, and if this is the document that I have in my mind, but as I understood, there's the parallel plane, which is a general rule, and then there are exceptions that basically are the tenting rules, and then what can be done by excavation. And so I had the same question originally, but my understanding is that that example may be an example of the exceptions to the parallel plane. I just offer that.
Well, I think you're right, because, well, yeah, it's just confusing, because it says in one spot that, you know, it's 35 feet from whichever's lower, and then,
And if we can get ordinance-style language, that
Yeah.
will help with questions like that.
Yeah, there's
Agreed, and
there's
then-
nothing about this in the draft that I mean, in this, I mean, I know it's not the ordinance, but there's nothing about excavation in here.
because then there's this, yeah,
I-
execution,
Unless
figuring
for
max
the-
allowable height.
For the wording for the, what was presented to city council,
There's
There-
nothing about a basement exception in this.
If I could also just make one quick clarification. So from what was presented at city council, it was discovered that there were some things that didn't quite transfer over exactly from how they were approved at the CRCRC to how they were presented to city council. So the document that's in your packet for tonight's meeting is that exact translation. So some things that were in the council packet last month were not quite the same. For example, the definition of building height that was shown to them was not exactly what had been approved by CRCRC, and staff was instructed to go back and find out exactly what had been approved, and that was what was going to be drafted. And so what's in the packet for tonight's meeting is simply exactly what, in recommendation form, without all of the backup material, what the recommendation is that CRCRC made to city council. And so that's what tonight's document is, and this information is what has been given to legal to draft into an ordinance.
This exact thing, so then there will be no exception around excavation because there's nothing here.
What is in this document is what is going to be put in.
So then that
So
would,
the-
that would make that not
So this
comply.
picture is just completely inaccurate, that was in the city,
I
what
think-
city
I think-
council
I-
voted to approve. I mean, this is from the council packet.
that was in the council package.
Yeah, and they voted to approve what
But
was
the
in the
language
council.
doesn't match.
No,
And then
what they
this-
voted to
doing,
approve
and
was
if
the other
it's
piece,
not right,
the piece that you have that was given to,
What's in
that's in our
tonight's
packet for this evening.
meeting
That's what was-
packet.
What was,
I didn't hear any qualifier on what was approved in the council meeting.
In the council meeting, after they made the motion to accept the CRCRC recommendation, it was made clear that we would go back and pull exactly what was approved by the CRCRC at their meeting. So if it had changed at all between approval from CRCRC and approval by city council or being delivered to the city council, it was put back to what was approved by CRCRC. Now, I will say some of the supporting documentation may have gotten missed. We pulled the things that said, here is the recommendation. And so if there's other important clarifying information in that document that wasn't part of the official, this is our recommendation, it didn't get pulled across. And legal doesn't have that to incorporate into the ordinance. And so if that's the case, we're gonna need to know what was part of that official recommendation so that it can be drafted. We pulled out exactly what they said, here was our recommendation. And it only had to do with keeping the residential building height, maximum permissible height, changing the definition, adding the tenting, putting in a special exception for CRCRC recommendation. Those were what was officially listed as this was our recommendation.
So I'm curious, cause I've had conversations with Alex many times over the course of this and, seen this information, I've seen, Jeff's presentation, and I consistently see the same example with CRCRC's work saying this complies, and I see the same exact house on the other example
Yeah.
saying this
Yeah.
does not comply. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying one is 100%
Yeah.
right all the time
Yeah.
or the other is,
yeah,
but I guess what I'm most interested in
Yeah.
perhaps is what staff's opinion is, because I think we're in the unenviable position here of having a
Why don't
small
we-
city with limited
Okay.
resources that has to swallow some
I'm
of the
gonna,
most.
I'm gonna
let me
open
finish.
up
Can I
a
finish?
regular agenda item number 11, which is update on CRC workshop regarding building height. Okay.
you want me to finish?
No, that doesn't mean this other one's closed. But I want to discuss building height.
And can I give a brief update on that too?
If
Because
you
I-
would, yes,
Okay.
please, that
So
would be good.
I've gone back and done some research, so there was discussion at the June 25th CRCRC meeting. And part of the recommendation that they made at that meeting was to recommend to have a workshop with city council and planning and zoning. That is the motion that was made. I think that was construed to say that the CRCRC would hold this workshop. Upon going back and looking at this, it sounds like it was a recommendation to council that council and P&Z hold a workshop where they could look at plans against the current proposal, see how they fit or don't fit, that kind of thing. And so we've sent out, the chair has sent out some, requests for sending in addresses that they would like to be looked at that workshop. But this is going to have to go to the city council first as a recommendation. So at the next city council meeting that it's posted for, which would be their August meeting, they're going to hear a recommendation to hold this workshop. That was CRCRC's recommendation, not necessarily that the CRCRC would hold that workshop. And so, at least that's how we're taking this motion that says the CRCRC moves to recommend to have a workshop with the City Council and Planning and Zoning Commission. And so at that point, it would be up to City Council to move forward with a workshop or not. We have a list of homes that people would like to see put against the proposal. We have approval from some of those homeowners, so obviously we would need that before we would use someone's plans and talk about them in a public meeting. But that is where we are as far as scheduling that workshop goes. So it will need to be, the council will need to schedule that at their next meeting.
And we're doing that after we post public notice for an ordinance?
This has not come to council at all at
No.
this point.
So why, but council knows it's coming, so why does council wanna have a joint meeting?
Council doesn't know it's coming.
Well,
Do
and
we know now?
and arguably, this was a recommendation made at the June CRCRC meeting that did not make it into the July city council meeting. And so, it should have gone there at that point for them to do that, to make that motion, or to at least discuss having that workshop.
Okay, so back to my point, you've probably seen this information as well, maybe Nikki, I don't know who's looking at, the things that come from CRCRC, that come from Jeff's presentation. Has staff looked at these, because ultimately y'all are the decision maker, to determine, do these houses comply or do they not? Because obviously we have a couple sides that maybe don't agree, and it doesn't really matter because it's going to fall to staff.
That will be the city engineer who will be doing that review. We don't do our zoning reviews.
Have we had the city engineer share this information with the city engineer and had them
We have
look at
not. That is the intention of that workshop. That has not been something that was approved
It'll
for.
be the city engineer that helps us conduct this workshop. The workshop,
Which is
what we
great. I like
intend-
the idea of the workshop,
Yeah.
but I like the idea of the workshop prior to getting an ordinance. I mean, it seems peculiar to me to put an ordinance together that some people think works, others don't believe works for the
Our
same
intention is to
exact
have the workshop-
houses.
Our intention is to have the workshop prior to the September 4th public hearing.
Or is that gonna happen? Or
We're
we
trying
just-
to, we're trying
Well,
to get it
how's
to
that gonna
happen.
happen if, doesn't it have to go to council first, and when's the
No,
next?
no, city,
Doesn't council have to approve the workshop? Isn't that what you said?
Well, that is the way that the motion from CRC was written. So that is our understanding, that the city council at their next meeting that it's published for, which could be their August 21st meeting, they would then take up the recommendation to hold this workshop. And it could be scheduled between then and the September 4th meeting. I mean,
Sounds aggressive.
it is. But again, we're trying to answer your question. For those houses, in particular, the ones that are being challenged from both sides. This doesn't work, yes, this does work, and all that. We'll get the city engineer to say, well, does it or doesn't?
Don't
And
you
if it
want that
doesn't work,
information?
how badly doesn't it work?
Shouldn't we know that already?
Shouldn't we, like, isn't that material information that we should have to understand the recommendation before we go down a path of posting public notice for an ordinance that we presumably aren't even sure works?
We, well, I mean.
I think Dave is
We're confident that it works, okay? We've not been allowed, and you know, this comes around again and again, that we've not been allowed to show the work that went into making these measurements against houses, okay? We've been advised by legal counsel that we can't do that because we don't have the permission to do it. Now, what has happened is we've gone to the folks that are concerned about this, sent them a note, asked them which houses you would like to have the city engineer look at and compare against the proposed ordinance, the new way. And we have now probably a dozen or so recommended houses, okay? We're hoping that by getting these houses in front of an engineer, that they can tell us whether or not our stuff works just the way that we're saying it will, or that it won't. And if it won't, what would need to change in order to make it work?
I agree with all that.
You're right, yeah, I mean, but you're concerned about the timing.
I'm
Absolutely.
concerned about the timing where we are, and this document that was in the city council packet that was approved has just flipped one page and there's completely contradictory language and pictures in it. That's concerning.
I'm also
And then we
really
got code
concerned
being written
about
already.
an infinite number of points to measure a house from. I mean, if you just happen to have a natural hole in the middle of your house where your ridge is, you know.
I think you'll find it in that
is
document
the
that Tony's
engineer
looking
gonna-
at, that there's a section in there about execution, and it talks about how you would interpolate between the contours of the original survey to accommodate, you know, that hole that would be created by a pre-existing house, or by a swimming pool, or
A
by
natural
anything.
what about a natural feature?
Well, I don't know what that natural what, the sinkhole?
Sure. I mean, some lots go like this a little bit, you know, and the sides are, I mean, there are lots that do this, right? And so,
Well-
does anyone really care that the house has to do this in the middle? Does that affect anyone? Is that what we really want?
Maybe, interpolation, you know, is, you know, you have contours that are surrounding a building.
If an on an ex-
Let's call
on a-
this the 10-foot contour right here, and there's a 10-foot contour on this side. Interpolation means I'm gonna connect those two. That's it. That's gonna be, and that will be my 35-foot point. That's where I'm at.
Understood.
Okay?
But what is written says very specifically the maximum allowable, where is it? Yeah, it says no portion may exceed 35 feet in height, and means the vertical distance above any point on the surveyed existing grade.
Okay.
So, I guess maybe I'm confused. Is it a straight line plane, or is it a
No.
35 feet up?
When you interpolate, you know, you follow the you created a contour that follows the line of the contour before it and below it.
Well, I mean, some of these lots you get 1 foot contours. You don't interpolate anything. You've got great data, right? Does that, I mean, so if, in this example, if you have a, you know, in the middle of the lot, there is a, you know, it slopes down.
Right.
The parallel plane is not connecting the two outside lines and going up.
Oh, oh.
It's taking the natural
Okay,
grade
okay.
and going up 35 feet, right?
Okay, okay.
Is that, am I understanding it
Yes,
right?
you are correct, yes, yes, yes. So we're not talking about taking away a house that was there. We're talking about some other feature that's on the property. That's what you're saying, okay. So we have, say, we're tearing down a house, okay, we've got a lot here. The existing house that's on this part of the lot.
Yeah, I get
Over
that.
here is a valley, is what you're saying. There might be some kind of a natural thing.
I'm just,
Will the 35 feet go to the base of that valley? And since it is a natural feature, and since, yeah, that's the way, yeah, 35 feet is how high you can go, that's it.
Well, unless you take the average, cause
we're
we
not
talked
averaging.
about the
Right.
average of.
We're not averaging.
We're not
Well,
averaging,
it's not averaging.
we're not averaging.
That's one of those.
That's where the
But
parallel,
that's a suggestion.
that's where the parallel plane is. The plane, you know, if everything's perfectly flat, it's really easy to envision what the plane is. You know, if everything's even if it's sloped and it's still continuous, it's easy to imagine that this plane is this sheet that is directly above this at the same angle as the sheet below. But whenever you start to get into heavily contoured areas where the topography changes a lot, it's harder to imagine. But all it really is you take your original contour map and you raise it 35 feet. That's all you gotta do. And the allowable height corresponds with what that contour map says. And the beauty of it is it starts off with something that is measured right at the very beginning of the project, and that is, and it is an official document, it is the survey.
It's a lot of
Now that I'm
points.
looking back at our packet, it doesn't have any of the language in here, and this is what the code is being
Yeah.
drafted from. It doesn't have any of the language about rock outcroppings, pools that were existing or existing improvements.
Existing houses, what,
Where did all that
how
go?
do you interpolate? None
Well,
of
you
that.
know, I think that what's ultimately gonna happen, because it seems like graphics are an important part of what we're trying to describe here, and we're guided against incorporating graphics into our ordinances, is that what will come out of here is like a kind of something similar to the drainage criteria manual, where the execution is explained in detail in that part of it. And that the ordinance points to this exterior thing that says, okay, this is what you gotta do, this is how you follow it.
Jerry? Comments?
I'm here.
Present.
Just wanna know what you think.
Well, I'm wondering when you're gonna run out of gas.
What time is it? It's past dinner time.
Yes, yeah, 25 to 9.
Well, I think it'll be helpful to have the actual codification of all of this to then have a single point of reference to discuss.
I think that was Councilmember Brown's point, is
Yeah.
that, you know, we've got a lot of text, there's been a tremendous amount of text that's been written around all this.
Yeah,
And we've had to piece it together into something, but to extract the essence of it is what you have. You have the essence of it.
It seems,
The
Inadequate.
essence of it is that we're gonna change the way we're measuring our height. That's the essence of it.
that is the essence of what I thought we were approving, and we're gonna have ample opportunity to further discuss, so.
Hopefully we will. So this one, what the code's being drafted from that's in our packet tonight does not have any reference to, like, there's been iterations that had reference to if there was already an existing structure there, or you try to, you know, make adjustments for if there was a pool or prior, you know,
I think
none of that's in
ultimately,
here.
ultimately, that document that's in your hand will spell that out better. I mean, right
But
now.
but this is what they're drafting the code off of?
Here's the thing, you know, our ordinance today does not go into a lot of detail about how you do what it is you're supposed to do. It's not all about that. I mean, it gets you to a point, you know, but it doesn't have a lot of descriptive information. Well, in this case, you do this, or if there's an outcrop, you do that. It doesn't do any of that.
But it's
What
simple,
does it
you
need
don't
to,
need
because
it.
it's not a parallel plane.
I mean, it's really simple. You take the high point, the low point, you take the difference, you get up to 10 feet, you have a reference
You know,
datum,
Yeah.
go from there.
Have you built in Lakeway?
I built my first house in Lakeway
Did you really?
25 years ago, yeah.
Okay. Did you have to knock a house down to do it?
No.
No, okay. You know how Lakeway works? Lake,
I can't remember.
yeah,
no.
well, anyway, Lakeway takes an average. They take an average, and they have actually a 30-foot maximum height. That's, I mean, it's based on a buildable average area. Unless you're in an area where you're knocking a house down.
Or you're not gonna what?
Where you're knocking a house down. See, Lakeway's got
Oh, knocking
plenty
a
of
house
new
down. I couldn't hear
buildable
you.
space. You know, Lakeway's very lucky. They got a lot of land out there, and they're building new houses all over the place. But if you're in a heritage area, okay, the way that they measure your maximum height is to look at the houses on either side of the lot and draw a line across the tops of those two houses, and you're allowed to build to the top of that line. My point being that there are places out there that have much wackier stuff than what we're proposing. You know, and it works for them. It's a good thing. You know, it preserves what it was they intended to preserve, which is the overall look of the place that they're in. That's what we're doing here. We're trying to do the same thing, not preserve what it looked like forever, but trying to get some harmony within the neighborhoods.
Yeah, I appreciate. I mean, I think we
I
all
think
want
that's a
that,
worthy
you
goal,
know.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Okay. I don't know what else we can do with this as far as discussion this evening. I think it was a very good discussion. I think it is one that was high time in coming. And to the extent that I could have brought this here sooner, I apologize to you all.
Why couldn't we meet last month without city council?
Whenever there's a quorum, did you notice how our thing was called a workshop? It was a workshop, okay? With a workshop, you don't have to have legal counsel present, okay? Whenever we have a meeting, like we're having tonight, and there's a packet involved and all that, we're notifying the public that we're having this meeting and things we're talking about, we, P and Z, have to have legal counsel present if there's a quorum. If we don't have legal counsel present, then we can't have a meeting. And so that's why we had our workshop
we could.
last month.
Legal wasn't available.
Wasn't available.
May I see
Yeah.
Okay, Shanti Jaykumar, 3309 Park Hills Drive. I just wanted to thank each one of you for what a wonderful collegial discussion you all had today. The beauty of our little small town government, and I've served 2 terms on city council, is that we are all volunteers. We don't get anything for all the effort we put in. I want to acknowledge all y'all's efforts, and especially Dave Bench. I started going to the CRCRC meeting May of 23, and I went for a whole bunch of meetings. Hardly anybody came, and they put out so much effort over this more than a year. We talked about height, we talked about vegetation, we talked about all of these things, and we have 2 highly qualified architects. One of them who's been a resident of Rollingwood for probably as long as we have been, 40 years, okay? And nobody said anything at that time. What is concerning to me is that we can't have rules that spread across the whole community and apply to everybody equally. We try, and that's why the zoning comes in. I want to give you all this little, it's from 1988, just to bring some clarity to how we were, where we were. The way they measured the height of a building. I'll see if they can make copies for you guys. This is from the zoning document. There was a little booklet that everybody in the community had. And this tells you how the height of a building is. It was 30 feet. They just straight out measured it. Take a look. And what it says is the desire is to have zoning also facilitates an orderly community by preventing overcrowding and traffic congestion and by creating proper relationships between lots and homes. Very simplistic. Also, all of the various city requirements, zoning is among the most important. Its enforcement, however, is dependent upon cooperation by residents and city officials alike. In turn, this translates into voluntary compliance by individual landowners, reports of violations by citizens and municipal personnel, and vigorous enforcement by the city. Anyway, just for a historical perspective, I know some of you like to listen to some of the history, and this is all there was for
Did you pass
how
that
we
around?
zoned our
Yeah.
community. I mean, they can make copies for you guys. I mean, I have the booklet with me, but this is just the zoning part and the height measurement part. And then I want to tell you all that please, in all this discussion about height, think about the privacy, because it's not about you getting 35 feet, whether it is measured by parallel plane or for whatever plane it is measured. It impacts your neighbors who also have a vested interest in their privacy. Regardless of how I might tolerate this tall building next to me, and if it comes on one side and the back of me, what am I going to do? I'm stuck. But my property is just as valuable to me. I've lived there 40 years, okay? So please talk about some privacy issues also when you discuss this height. It's not all about height or how you situate your building, though it impacts your neighbor. So I have taken pictures of all of the houses, as you all know, in 2003, went around and took pictures. I have 2 albums of all the houses the way it used to be. We did that because once the septic systems were removed and we got sewer lines, we knew this was going to happen. People could build as much as they wanted because we didn't have to set the thing back 40 feet, literally, because we had a septic field in our front yard. Okay, so people went through all of that. We know that valuable land, we want to make best use of your land, but your property rights end where your neighbors begin. So we need to be cognizant of that in terms of not just that you can build whatever you want on your lot. You want to be a good neighbor too. So please understand that privacy matters do matter in the long run, and we need to be cognizant and try to build so that you get maximum from your lot, but also that you don't take away your neighbors. And I want to say to you, Dave, it's a thankless job when you're a volunteer, but we can all disagree without being disagreeable. And I really do not appreciate people coming in and casting aspersions on any of you, city council or anybody. That's just not who we are as Rollingwood citizens. So I need to go, but I have really appreciate all of y'all for being very collegial with each other, disagreeing, but wanting to have something that's good for the whole community. That's what we are all about. So,
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
You are
That's great.
welcome.
Thank you, very nice.
I need to go, so thank you.
Great. All right. Do we have anything else we want to say about this? I think that put a nice cap on things.
I'm good. I hope we get the opportunity to discuss with council.
Okay. So then we'll move along to regular agenda item number 10, which is discussion regarding CRC residential tree and landscape recommendations that have been set for public hearing on September 4th, 2024. Ashley, is there anything you want to do to introduce this?
No, this is the same history as the last item. So
Okay.
the legal counsel is working on drafting this ordinance. Notice will go out for that public hearing. We will have the draft language in an actual code amendment version for you all to review ahead of that meeting.
Okay.
And that's it.
Thank you.
I was trying to remember on trees, did planning and zoning, I remember we had 2 robust discussions.
Right.
Did we ever get a final version of that we approved and
No.
sent to council?
You did not, no. And nobody has approved it. It is just like going back to some of the instructions I'm getting from city councilors, is that there is concern about, so many of our things are piecemeal, and they would like to have more of a comprehensive approach to getting approvals done. Okay?
Said that,
Right?
yeah.
Okay, fair enough. So, we had the recommendation, based on what we'd heard from P and Z, we had incorporated P and Z recommendations into a document that has now been sent for codification, and you'll get an opportunity to review that. That is in the works right this minute, and hopefully we ought to have that by Friday, or I'm told Monday by the latest.
And did CRCRC, like we have this summary of the height,
Yeah.
did CRCRC make a proposal of a recommendation to city council that they approved already, or is that not
We
happening?
brought the document, but we didn't discuss it.
So
It was at that
council
time-
hasn't voted on
Not
anything
really,
related
no,
to
no,
trees?
no, other than to say that rather than look at this document the way that it is, why don't we codify it, because it'll be easier for us to digest. We're handling this the same way as we're handling the building height.
Except city council approved something on building height. That's why I was
They
asking, I'm
approved-
seeing if there's a
no,
difference
no,
between the
no,
trees and the.
They did not, they did not. What they approved on building height was to codify what we have recommended, so
Yeah,
that
I
it
mean,
could
that's
be
what it's-
reviewed. That's what,
That's
there's
what
no,
I'm
there's
saying.
no,
That's why it's,
no approval
because
of
it's a
the
corner?
document.
because here it says it's bigger,
Just,
it says
this is
10-foot
good,
minimum front yard.
we understand what you're saying,
But
let's
it's-
codify
And
it,
the fence
and then we'll
allowing
talk about it some more.
10 foot in.
Okay.
If you think we're past that, then I'm sorry, maybe I wasn't.
Well, wait, that's a sign.
That was the
know,
first meeting
we're
we've
not
had. I've
that-
been just
we're
watching
not
the
that
council
far
meetings
down
and
the
So
road.
stuff.
it's just
Okay.
mints?
That's why I
Yes,
appreciate
must be
having so
located.
much discussion around this evening. This is really helping
Yeah, but this is
make up for
10-foot minimum
lost
front
time.
yard depth.
Right, yeah, we haven't
Okay.
had any meetings
But
lately.
that's just
Corner of
one
Building
section.
Street.
It's just
Okay,
one
that's
little
good to know.
section.
All right.
See, when we built, we couldn't put a fence in the
All right.
front yard.
If there's nothing else
That's
about
why-
this, I will take a
Well,
motion
we
to
built
adjourn.
7 days, 30
or
I'd just like to give a heads up on the tree ordinance, that there's nothing mentioned about protecting the tree roots during construction. So I'll be looking into that and copying probably City of Austin for maintaining trees during construction.
Yeah, root zone,
Yeah.
yeah,
got-
critical root zone.
Across the street, I got a couple trees that are turning brown when it's not fall yet. And it's just been ripped up, tore up, and no consideration given. So, that's it.
I've invited Jerry to join us for the next CRC meeting, which is this coming Tuesday, to talk more in detail about that. And that might be something that we want to consider with the tree ordinance as well.
This number 6 has critical root zone and a bunch of discussion about it.
Yeah. But that's, not specific on how you protect the roots during construction. I haven't looked at it in depth yet, but I recall from a few years ago, City of Austin requires plywood across areas for preventing compaction.
Sometimes.
Yeah, there. And besides just the boards up along the trunk, but
Okay, yeah, I just saw it. So this one's no construction or disturbance on an area that constitutes more than 50%, but then you can also protect the rest of it, is what you're saying.
And then there's also the finished grade. You have to look at that, and if it's gonna go up around the tree and cover the base. So, none of that's been really identified yet, and it's shown to be remaining on the site when it's probably a future dead tree.
Yeah, I think in City of Austin, it's in their environmental criteria manual. And it's pretty good. Like
Yeah.
I mean, it's a little over the top, but it's pretty good.
Yeah, I wouldn't think about it except when I'm seeing like the trees, the neighbor's trees, turned around, wondering why. It just, it just,
That's why I was on the
Good.
city
Thank
council.
Well, thank you for all the time spent on this, Dave. It is appreciated, regardless
what,
of robust discussion.
Had I known.
I said from the beginning, that was my biggest concern, was that to really do this thing right and capture all of the different variables in a residential code update, redo, whatever you wanna call it, with,
You know-
considering all the unintended consequences and having experts weigh in, I mean, it's arguably more than the commercial in some ways, I think.
I personally appreciate both of y'all's all of your perspectives, because you do bring expertise to the table and careful consideration that I appreciate listening to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Likewise.
Appreciate you too.
We'll get there.
Yeah,
We'll get there.
All right,
You get something done, that's for sure.
We'll get it done.
all right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Seconded.
Second, all right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay. It is 8:55, and I call this meeting adjourned.